All right. Good morning again and welcome everyone. Happy Black History Month, happy School Counseling Week, and a very, very happy Georgia Legislative Day. My name is Emily Cusick, and I am proud to serve as a co-chair of the 2022 Georgia Legislative Day, along with Shireen Clement. It is such an honor to be among so many esteemed colleagues and educators, and we appreciate your efforts in being together virtually to engage in this critical and timely work. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the intense challenges that have served so many of us as we continue to navigate the complexities and disruptions brought by this relentless global pandemic. I know we are tired, stretched in more ways than we could have anticipated. Nevertheless, you all, institutional leaders, school counselors, admissions officers, community-based organizers, and education advocates have shown up today in unity to advocate for a more just Georgia. The late author and activist Bell Hooks reminds us that education is the practice of freedom. Educating is a vocation rooted in hopefulness. As teachers and educators, we believe that learning is possible, that nothing can keep an open mind from seeking after knowledge and finding a way to know. What better affirmation of that message than to spend our collective energies today advocating for legislative change? Now, this morning, I see a lot of familiar faces and Georgia Legislative Day veterans who are very, very familiar with this legislative process, who have attended many legislative days in the past. And good afternoon or good morning to you all. I'm so excited to see you here again. I know you will be a fantastic resource for newcomers throughout the day. I'm also so excited and thrilled to see so many new faces. Welcome, welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for being here. If you're new and maybe feeling a little bit nervous, which is understandable, I assure you that today we will create a space where everyone is starting from the same baseline of our policy priorities. There is a lot of knowledge in this virtual space and a lot of folks to call on today. Now, nearly 2 years into the global pandemic, I know most of us have gotten accustomed to all things Zoom and virtual, but please do bear with us in the event that technology does not work in our favor today. We've got Jay McCann from Westminster Schools on standby. He's going to serve as our Zoom technology support throughout the day. So if any questions come up or any errors arise, please do message Jay. But he's a Georgia Legislative Day Committee member, and he's going to be a great asset for all of us today. So thank you, Jay, for helping us out. There is also an abundance of resources we are excited to share with you this morning, including the links to our pre-event webinar series that we invite you to explore throughout the day or beyond today. We're so very, very grateful that you have taken the time out of your busy week and season to be here. Honestly, what better time to do so than during our school counselor week? I am excited to learn alongside of you and spend our day among policy experts and equity leaders, moving the needle on the legislation that shapes our education landscape. And with that, I have the honor of introducing the Georgia Legislative Day Committee, without whom this event simply would not have been possible. Along me, I have Shereen Clement, who served as our Georgia Legislative Day co-chair. Thank you, Shireen. Jackie Atchison from Mercer University, Erin Layton from the Howard School, Sandria Mason from the University of Pittsburgh, Jay McCann from Westminster Schools, Kimberly Norfolk from North Cobb Christian School, Matt Wilmer from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and Emily Wurst from the University of West Georgia. Thank you all so much for your commitment to this work, for serving on this committee, and for making this program possible. We are so, so grateful. We would also love to extend a special thank you to our NACAC and SACAC leaders who have joined us today, any past Legislative Day chairs, SACAC board and committee members. A huge heartfelt thanks in particular goes out to Jay Domain, SACAC's government relations co-chair, who has been an incredible support and thought partner in the planning of this program. Jade, thank you. We're grateful for you being here and for your service to this profession. With that, I will now pass it over to my dynamic Legislative Day co-chair, Shireen Clement. Thank you all again for being here.
Morning, everyone. As Emily mentioned, my name is Shireen Clement, and I'm so excited to be here. I know Legislative Day has been my favorite SACAC event and professional development event since I started in the admissions field. So being able to help create this event this year, keep it in a virtual space to keep everyone safe has been honestly an honor. As some of you might have known, Legislative Day is going to look a little different this year than even last year when it was virtual. And I want everyone to cross your fingers or say your prayers that next year we can go back in person to the state capitol. It is such a unique experience. But this year is going to look a little bit different. One thing that's always happened and been super critical to Legislative Day is meeting with legislators after we kind of do our norming and understanding of NACAC priorities and different policies. This year, we're transitioning to empowering our participants to scheduling their own meetings if they would like after our initial day of programming. So we're going to focus a lot on understanding the policies, understanding priorities, having deep discussions, and then empowering you to go on forward with that. If you noted on your registration that you would like to meet with a legislator after this event concludes, within a week, we're going to email you a list of all the legislators, their contact information, sample scripts for requesting meetings via email or phone. We're also going to email you anyone who registered for this event who shares the same legislators as you. So if you would like, you could always work together to schedule one meeting. That way you have some support. But if you're the only one assigned to your legislator, you can also always reach back out to our committee and someone will attend a meeting with you. So you're not on your own doing that. We're asking that you schedule those meetings before March 1st, just that they're happening in tandem with each other and before the end of the legislative season. Now, everyone here, regardless of if you wanted a meeting or not, will also be receiving what we're going to call an advocacy packet after the conclusion of this meeting. And that's going to be mailed to you. So if you registered and didn't include a mailing address, or you're like me and you work at a school where maybe you gave us your school address, but you might never see that piece of mail for months, and you can always email me and let me know if you need to update that address. But we're going to send you out a packet that will include some SACAC branded cards, some scripts, some more information about your legislator. So you can actually write a handwritten note to them. Again, hopefully before March 1st, explaining anything that was super passionate to you, any policy priorities that really resonated with you, and, advocating that way through the written process. We're going to also have a fun little photo challenge with that so we can report back to SACAC how many letters were sent out from our state and really just engage with our legislators that way this year. Before you attended this event today, you should have received via email the agenda for the day, our advocacy day of packet that shows you all the NACAC priorities, as well as some links to Senate and House bills that are in progress during this legislative season, and a little addendum about how the process works in the Georgia Senate and House, and the proposed governor's budget for 2023. So we're going to get that posted in the chat for you in case you didn't get a chance to review it, but I really would suggest keeping it bookmarked throughout the day, and also moving forward as you maybe pursue meetings or written correspondence with your legislators. And if you have any questions about that after the event, you can always reach out to us, but within the chat today and within the breakout rooms, we really hope that you're able to engage on those topics and feel free to learn even more about them and dive even deeper into them. And of course, as we have mentioned, it is School Counselor Week, which is a really exciting time. And I know on our side of the desk in admissions, we really appreciate our school counselors. And I know your students and SACAC appreciates you as well. You might have noticed in your initial email that you received, you had a lot of virtual backgrounds to choose from. And one of which is the one I'm using today, the bright orange one, that is a tribute to our school counselors. So if you'd like to use any of those backgrounds today, we welcome you to do that, especially if you currently have a virtual background that's noted to your school or any affiliation you might have with an institution. But we really do want to take that time to say thank you to our school counselors. And we hope that even after this event, if you'd like to use that background for the week, we'd love for you to be able to use that. At this time, we're going to take a little pause and go off of sharing the screen and take a group screenshot photo so that we can all remember this. So if you guys would turn your cameras on, and we're going to stop sharing the screen and get that group photo so we can commemorate this event.
Okay, I'm gonna count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I also asked today, if you take any fun screenshots of your breakout room, or later on, say you have a Zoom meeting with your legislator and you ask them to take a screenshot, if you post or share those at all, please use the hashtag GLD2022 so we can see those posts as well. You can also always feel free just to send that in an email so we have access to it for future SACAC programming and to commemorate the things that we're doing today.
Okay. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Mr. David Hawkins to provide a policy overview on NACAC's legislative priorities and initiatives. David Hawkins is the Chief Education and Policy Officer for the National Association for College Admissions Counseling based in Arlington, Virginia. The NACAC is a nonprofit membership association that represents more than 15,000 high school counselors and college admissions officers throughout the US and around the world. NACAC is devoted to making the transition between high school and post-secondary education equitable, transparent, and fair. Mr. Hawkins holds a BA and MA in government from the College of William and Mary. We are honored to welcome him to our program. I will now pass it off to you, Mr. David Hawkins. Will you need to share your screen?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. And yeah, I do have a PowerPoint, so if it's okay to share that, I will do that.
Please do.
Thank you, everybody, for the warm welcome and for having me here today. And before I get started on my PowerPoint, I would love to just thank you all, first of all, for being willing to take time out of your professional lives to advocate. If you've heard me say this before, if you've heard a presentation of mine before, I always want to take a moment to thank you for stepping out of your role. To do this advocacy. I have from time to time taken on volunteer roles in my professional life, and I know how much time and effort it takes. So I very much appreciate what you're doing, and it is truly making a difference on behalf of the profession and the students we serve. So heartfelt thank you to all of you. And as I heard the hosts talking about earlier, it is National School Counseling Week. So it's a great opportunity to be talking about the issues that we care about and celebrating our school counselors as they do make a significant difference in the lives of our students, but also in the relationship that we at NACAC and all of our affiliates really cultivate. The interactions between school counselors and college admission offices is really priceless. So want to thank school counselors on those levels and many more. So so with that said, let me move over to get my PowerPoint here. I'll share this. Let me go to screen slideshow rather. Come on now. Can everyone see the screen at least? No? Yes? No? I get a few yeses and a few nos.
I'm seeing it now.
You're seeing it now. Okay, for some reason it started in the middle of the presentation. Okay, can everybody see it as thumbs up for folks who can see it? Okay, wonderful. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. So, we'll just do an overview this morning of the NACAC advocacy framework. You might have heard that we have recently undergone some transformation with regard to our traditional advocacy platform. And just at the outset here, I'll tell you that we didn't land very far from where we started. So that's good. All the legislative priorities we've talked about for many years are still very much in play. But over the next 6 months or so, you will see some activity to try to maybe elevate some of the priorities to a level that we haven't had in the past, maybe reorder a little bit and do some deep diving into some of the top 3 priorities that we really identified from our conversations with membership. So I'll run through that with you today and just give you a sneak peek, because like I said, this work is going to take us some time. We want to engage with our members. We want to engage with you all. We want to really understand how we can best implement these new policy priorities of ours and how best to articulate them as well. So we really are early on in this process. And in the interim, everything we've said before is still going to be relevant and applicable. So we're not pulling the rug out from under anyone, and we aren't really fundamentally changing the things that we've traditionally cared about. So I'll start with just a really sort of high-level introduction to how NACAC generates its priorities in the first place. As many of you doubtlessly know, our reason for being as an organization is this sort of focus on ethical admission practice. And it is in our most recent incarnation expressed through this guide to ethical practice in college admission. This, as many of you know, was formerly our, sort of loosely what we called our code of ethics. And in the past, it was enforceable. But thanks to a Department of Justice inquiry over the last few years into restraint of trade, issues that might have been raised by some of the provisions, we have now moved this to a best practices document. So one of the things that's really important to know is it's still central to who we are as NACAC. It doesn't, just because we're not enforcing it doesn't mean we don't care about it anymore. So what's important in terms of our advocacy approach is that we understand that the core values that are expressed in this document, which I've listed out here on this slide, education, commitment to education, commitment to access and equity, commitment to professionalism as to who we are as professionals, and that kind of has a multidimensional quality to it, because first of all, we want to comport ourselves with a professional demeanor, but there's also an element of that indicates that we are a profession, that there are standards, that there are practices, that there is expertise that we bring to the table. And that's going to be important as we start thinking about how we articulate our priorities here in the future. Collegiality, as I said, the connection between our school counselors and our college admission officers is fundamental to who we are. And ultimately, I think one of the values that we want to promote is that we can have these discussions about professional issues. And in this context, we can have discussions about policy without degrading to a point where we're calling names and we're sort of fabricating things, as we see so often in the general public today. I think we want to be a place that advocates fiercely for what we believe in, but does so in a way that fosters respect, inclusion, and a focus on what we would consider sort of research-based, evidence-based practice. So that ties in actually with the professionalism value. Trust is something that we really are sort of, the verb I'm looking for escapes me. Trust is something that is, again, elusively sort of deep in its policy implications. I think we all understand trust on a level. We all want to trust each other, but fundamentally, where this intersects with our policy agenda is that when students approach an institution or a school, it's normally one of trust. I don't think they don't expect to be manipulated or defrauded or otherwise mistreated when they're in a relationship with a school or someone who represents a school. And we want to cultivate that trust. So to that end, for many of you who've been around our policy priorities for many years, we care very deeply about preserving that trust by not encouraging or allowing predatory practices. And that's something that we've done for a very long time, primarily with the for-profit sector, but often this intersects with our ethical practices, even in our nonprofit sector, where we want to make sure that students have the tools that they need to make informed enrollment decisions. And then finally, obviously, a commitment to social responsibility. And you'll see that throughout our entire legislative and policy framework, just as you'll see the commitment to access and equity. This is something that has been brought into stark relief over the last few years. It's been something we've cared about for as long as I've been at NACAC, and I've been here for 22 years. So this is really the organizational foundation from which we are building the rest of our policy priorities. And I should note that as I go through this, any questions you have, feel free. I don't know that I'm not seeing the chat right away, but if you want to raise your hand or just interrupt me, any one of you, just throw it out there, because I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. So now that you've sort of seen the foundation of what we do, one of the things that we did more recently, as you can see, we issued a report in September 2020. When Angel Perez came on as CEO of NACAC in 2020, it represented a fairly major transition in not just in the staff at NACAC, which any organization where the leadership changes, you have change in the organization itself, but it also represented a moment before even before the pandemic took root. Even though this report came out after it, our transition here really started several years prior to the CEO transition. And it really was sort of encompassed by an ad hoc committee that we convened. It was called the Ad Hoc Committee on the Future of Leadership in College Admission. And what came out of that group was, in part, this policy report that you see represented on the screen here. And some of the points that they hit, this was a sort of a representation of where the membership's collective head was. I mean, this was an attempt to really figure out, what do we care about as an organization, particularly on a policy level. And the first one is going to look familiar, looking at college admission policy and practice to really center the students. And that's really, again, that ethical code, those core values are really centered on making sure that students are central to our thinking as we look at what we do professionally. Emphasizing transparency. That's, again, in order for students to have the opportunity to make informed admission decisions, they have to be able to understand the rules of the road. They have to understand, nothing can be sort of under the table for them. They have to have it all out in front of them. And that is a value and a policy priority, really, that we want to promote. We want to base state and federal policy on the premise that education is a public good. For those of you who have been around state and federal policy for a while, you'll know that funding for higher education, even though the actual dollar amounts have grown, the funding per capita, per student, has actually declined over the years in most states. And the model, particularly at the federal level, where in 1965, when the Higher Education Act was passed, the vision there was that a Pell Grant would pay the full cost of attending a four-year public college. And any of you who have experience with the Pell Grant know that it is nowhere close to paying for 4 years at a public college. So what has happened is, from that original vision, where higher education was very much seen as the public good, worth the public investment to cover the full cost, it is now, the philosophy has very much been shifted to higher education as a private good. So federal lending for student loans has gone up 360% since it was originated in the early 70s. The idea that the cost now is really up to the individual has just widened the equity gap in higher education. And we believe that while individuals receive a definite benefit from higher education, your salary is going to be higher over the course of a lifetime. You're going to get benefits that accrue to you as an individual. You're going to feel more efficacy. You're going to feel more social connection. And this is all research based. There's also a value to the public, in that there are higher wages. The tax base is broader. There's less incarceration. There's more social connectivity. More people are engaged in politics and policy. These are things that accrue to the country, to the public at large. And we think that we've lost sight as states and as a federal government, that we are in fact getting a great deal out of higher education. That we should be supporting it as a public good. I mentioned earlier protecting students' rights. We want to make sure that we preserve that trust, that students aren't being ripped off when they go into a higher education setting. And then finally, fully funding public higher education. This is something that, again, goes back to whether we see this as a public or private good, and also just giving institutions the funding they need to operate on a very basic level. I think, as we'll see, a lot of what ails us in the college admission space these days, a lot of people talk about, the practices that enrollment management fosters, the idea that, that certain, for instance, children of donors have a leg up in the admission process. A lot of these are symptoms of a system that's fundamentally unsound, because institutions are having to scramble for so much money on their own that they're acting more like private entities, less like entities that are acting in the public good. Even when I refer to private institutions, they certainly have their own set of considerations, but they have to even act, sort of more that way, because there isn't the same purchasing power for a Pell Grant, for instance, which can be used at private institutions as well as public. So you can kind of see how this, first of all, it builds on the core values. It elaborates on them a bit. It sort of fleshes out our philosophy a little bit more. And then it leads us to really where we arrived in November of 2021. Throughout the course of 2021, I, as Chief Education and Policy Officer, worked with a law firm called Education Counsel, which has been around this college admission counseling space for a very long time. And we talked to members throughout 2021 and asked them what their biggest priorities were. And all of that work culminated with a board discussion. And you may have seen this message back in November from our board chair, Fiona Rees, where we recommended sort of a reshuffling of our policy priorities. And this slide shares with you the really high overview, and I'll get into each one of these as we go through this slide presentation. But you can see that there are three really fundamental areas that emerged from our conversations with members over the last year that we decided we are going to really go sort of deep into that and put a lot of effort into developing evidence-based policy recommendations. The first is recentering the priorities of NACAC on member expertise. I mean, that's really, sorry, these aren't the priorities. I apologize. I'm going through those in a minute. These are more the principles behind moving to the three priorities that I'll talk about. You know, we want NACAC member expertise to be front and center. As an organization, it can be tempting to take positions on all manner of issues. But after a while, you start to lose standing, because if that's not really where your expertise is, you know, it's tough for you to take a position that really differentiates you from anyone that you might pull off the street. So for example, we've been asked in the past to weigh in on issues like faculty unionization. Right, like I'm sure we have some opinions about what faculty unionization means, and we certainly as NACAC could articulate a position, but we aren't necessarily the experts in that field. It's not where our sort of lived professional experience gives us the edge over someone else, right? So we want to make sure that we're centering our issues where we have the most expertise. As I said a minute ago, we also want to shift into evidence-based research and to undergird our policy recommendations, because when you're in an advocacy situation, oftentimes there's two things that are going to really help you. Number one is the stories you tell, and that's what makes you an expert. That's something that I tell every group of people that I talk to about advocacy, is that the stories that you tell from your professional experience make you the expert. You don't have to know all the research. You don't have to know how many votes it takes to invoke cloture on a filibuster. You know, all of that stuff is out there, and it's great if you want to learn it. That's lovely. But what really you bring to the table is the knowledge that you have gained from your professional experience, and how the problems that you encounter could benefit from help. You don't even have to have the solution necessarily. That's the role that I play, certainly, and any ideas you have are also part of the solution. But really, the leverage you have here is in telling your story, and what we want to do is to develop the research that augments those stories. So that's going to be our role. And you know, one of the things we've done, and you'll see it in one of the priorities, is we've done a lot of research on the effects of school counseling on students' post-secondary plans. And as I said earlier, counselors make a significant difference in the lives of students. And we know that because we did the research and we have the stories to prove it. So not only is it significant, it's statistically significant, which is going to appeal. You know, you're going to have people that you run into in legislative situations who are your storytellers, and you're going to run into your data people. You know, it's sort of like personality traits, right? And so having both of those things is going to help you. And we're here to inform that process. As I said, we want our advocacy to track very closely to what our research and our narrative tells us, and those recommendations will stem directly from that, and the line will be very clear. This is what the research says. Here's what we think you should do, and now we're going to go out and tell everybody about it. So as we go over the next 6 months to a year, and we start to gather this research, we start to assemble the body of knowledge that will support our priorities, we're then going to think about ways to then pull ourselves back together as an organization, as a grassroots. And that's where you'll be essential to helping us understand how we can most effectively go out there and then start to advocate. I know I heard just a little while ago, you know, the lamenting about not being able to go to the Capitol itself, and that's been something we haven't been able to do either here in Washington. And we very much want to get back out there and do that. We're not going to do it this year because we're taking this opportunity to pause, but we very much want to get back in the habit of going up there because it's something I've enjoyed most in my 22 years here. It's so effective. It's such a nice gold mine of advocacy and opportunity. Every year we come off those visits and we get just reams of paper to follow up on, and of course now figurative paper because it's all digital. But the opportunities that come from these visits are so great. And as I said a minute ago, we want members engaged at all levels of this. So expect to see more from us as we start to formulate our policy frameworks and we start to build out the research and the advocacy that stems from that. So here's where we're going to lead. This is the meat of the issue. And there are three issues. Number one, student and equity-centered admission practices. That seems to make sense, right? That's where we come from as an organization. It addresses the admissions community in our membership, and it's pretty consistent with our core values. The second one is professional responsibility and ethics for all college admission and counseling professionals. Again, it's who we are. And now that we can't enforce our ethical practices, we are now going to have to reorient. And this is where the National Admissions Practice Committee, as well as the Affiliate Admissions Practices Committee, are going to be really central. We need to move from enforcement to what I call a three-pronged approach, which we'll go through in a minute, of education, communication, and advocacy. And that'll overlap. We'll have a role. Our government relations folks will have a role in this. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then finally, expansion of the capacity and impact of school counselors and college advisors. So you can see that I think that makes intuitive sense. It's exactly where we want to be. And these are the three issues that you're going to hear a lot more about from NACAC. Now, there's some other issues that we're going to continue to address. College affordability is a big one, right? But this is where our fundamental expertise is going to come from. And this is where we're going to really do some robust work to try to move the field, to try to move the policy discussions, and to give you some real tools at the state level and at the federal level to go and advocate for new ideas and to share this new research that we're going to do. So as we go through this, I'm mindful of time. It's only 9:30. I know the schedule has a break at 10, so I've sort of maybe expanded this a little bit. Is that okay with the? Okay, good. All right, I see some nodding. Please jump in if I go too long, but I have my eye on the clock as well. So student and equity-centered admission practices. That's pretty straightforward in terms of how we describe it. Now, what does it mean in practice? Well, I've got a picture of the Supreme Court here on the screen. So I think you can probably guess where our first order of business is going to take us, which is that the Supreme Court agreed to hear the combined cases against Harvard and UNC, and they will likely do so in the fall. That's when I'm hearing that the cases will actually be heard. So it's a good jumping off point for me to talk about what this priority is going to mean for NACAC. Number one, we are absolutely going to jump in with both feet to this court case. We are already, I just had it's probably like the fifth call in this series of calls, but our colleagues at Education Council, the group I mentioned earlier that helped us with our advocacy overhaul, will be writing an amicus brief for this case. And if you're not familiar with amicus briefs, amicus literally means friend, and so amicus is amicus curiae is friend of the court. So the objective here will be that we are going to join with other groups. So groups like ACRO, the Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. We're going to even try to pair up with College Board and ACT, and potentially even the Law School Admissions Council, because they've been doing a lot of work similar to us at the law school level. We're going to join forces and write a brief that sort of represents the admission profession to say, you know what, first of all, we are nowhere close to a time when we can just not consider race as something that affects the equity equation in college admissions. And then secondly, here is how we structure what we do. Here is how we do the work that we do, so that the court is not sitting up there basing their opinions on essentially what lay people might a knowledge that a layperson out in the street might have, because that's essentially what the Supreme Court is working with. I mean, I'll give them a little credit that they probably know maybe a tiny bit more, but their biases and their perceptions are still pretty much the same as someone you might run into at a party. And I know we've all done this, where you've been at a family gathering or a social gathering, and people find out that you work in or around college admission, and they want to talk to you about all the things that that are either wrong with college admission, or how their child or neighbor's child might benefit. So in any event, we want to educate the Supreme Court. Job one. The second thing that we really want to do here, and having been around this for 22 years, this legal grounds, if you start with 1978, the Bakke versus the Regency University of California, which was the first real landmark case in the college admission jurisprudence, the grounds upon which colleges can consider race as a factor in admissions decisions has narrowed. It goes from Bakke to the Michigan cases, to the Fisher cases at the University of Texas just a few years ago, and now culminating in these cases. And of course, the fear is that the court essentially closes the lid. They say, yep, no more consideration of race as a factor in admission decisions. So we always want to hope for the best, but we want to prepare for the worst. And I think the second bullet here is really aimed at growing the playing field. We know there's a lot more that can be done than just looking at how we consider an applicant's race as we literally examine their application. There's so much more we can be doing to think about equity. We're going to fight like hell to keep that as part of our legal sort of suite of tools that we can use. So we're not giving up on that, but we also want to start opening up new fronts on this thing. And we want to figure out, because this equity question, this racial equity question, we're not anywhere close to solving that. And NACAC is going to be very serious about just opening the doors so much wider than the current legal debate would suggest. And to that end, I'll say that if you didn't see it already, that just a couple of weeks ago, NACAC and NASFA released a joint report that creates a really broad framework for thinking about racial equity in college admission and financial aid. And this is a first step into what we want to start doing in great detail in the coming years. I mean, this project is going to take us years. But this report, if you haven't already read it, I think it's an important document to come out of the admissions and financial aid associations, because it basically acknowledges that the constructs within which we work and have worked for the last century were never designed for equity. Now, in the last century, there have been a lot of improvements made. There's no question that we've made some progress, but we're still working with a lot of the same constructs that were designed fundamentally to exclude. And that's just something that I think as a profession, it was important that we all acknowledge. And so what the report did is it really went through elements of admissions and financial aid, and I've listed them out here, looking at things like selectivity. These are in some institutions, these are sacred cows, because so much is invested in selectivity. But I think we have to take a clear-eyed look at how does selectivity affect equity? And I think a lot of us are going to know the answer to that superficially. I certainly have my suspicions. But we have to really start doing the hard work as institutions, as stakeholders, of saying, gosh, if we want to be selective, then we have to somehow come to grips with the fact that we may not be equitable anytime soon. There's going to be a lot of ways in which we're fundamentally inequitable. The same goes for a lot of other sort of practices. Down at the bottom, I talk about shaping the face of the institution. As part of this project, we talked to a lot of students of color. And one of the first things they said was, I didn't see anyone in the admission office that looked like they would understand who I was or what I had gone through, no matter what it was that they went through. And this was another thing that, that students are tired of sort of hearing that because they're students of color, that somehow they should have trauma in their lives, or they're expected to bring that trauma with them to the application process. we need to, what these students were telling us, and it's not new, we all sort of have heard this. This is stuff that we have known for a while, but to hear it directly from the students really just illustrated that we have to embark on a long process to question everything that we do and really look at it, switch the lens out, switch the enrollment management lens out, switch the selectivity lens out, and put the equity lens on. And we have to involve students in all of this. So this is a report that I hope you'll take a look at. I'll certainly share the link in the chat once I'm done. But it's a starting point. It's not a solution. It's really a starting point, and we will absolutely be getting into this further and would love to have your input and involvement as we do move forward. We're going to be working with NASPA and with other organizations to do more research in this area and to start conversations with colleges and universities about what more can be done. But we're really determined to move the needle certainly on racial equity, but also on other forms of equity that need to be addressed. We have so many different people who are left out, who are made to feel other. This is something that, if the pandemic and the last couple of years has taught us anything, we've just got such a long way to go still. I might pause there. We're a little more than halfway done. Is there anybody who has any questions at this point? I don't hear any. Oh, I see that there's a link already. Thank you for the report. Okay, well, I'll keep it moving here because I do want to give you plenty of time to have your break and to do whatever business you need. The professional responsibility for ethics in college admission counseling professionals. This is one where we are, as I said earlier, we really want to break this into three components. Number one, if you think about rules that we'd like for people to think about, practices that we'd like for people to think about, but we don't enforce anymore. Education is clearly important, because if you don't know that something is a best practice, you're not likely to practice it. You might luck into it. Maybe your experience gets you there, but we really do want to turn our lens to educating people. And that includes practitioners, but to some degree, it also includes students and families and policymakers. And that's where this second communications element comes in. We want to reorient ourselves so that we're producing a steady stream of communications and a flow of communications. So if we think about the admissions calendar, there's natural points during the year where we could be emphasizing our best practices, where we could be constantly just keeping them on people's radar screens. And, because the Department of Justice entered into an agreement with us that we are not going to enforce anymore, we'll have to be really careful about saying, hey, this is something that we encourage, that our research, again, this is why it's important to have research and evidence, that our research suggests is good for students. And we'll work hard at doing that. But that's a second sort of plank in our platform. There also are going to be issues where we do need to advocate in a policy context. One of our best practices, for instance, is that admission officers not be paid on commission. We're not fundamentally, we do a lot of marketing. There is sort of an exchange that is similar to a sales situation, but fundamentally we are trying to give students the tools they need rather than sort of shove them through a door. We're trying to put our best foot forward so that students can make a good decision based on information that is transparent and clear. So there will be times where we have to stand up and say, listen, we don't think you ought to be, as for-profit colleges, for instance, paying recruiters based on the number of students they recruit, that it should not be a commission structure, because then the incentives go the wrong way. They start to, the incentive that becomes to, pressure students into enrolling so that you get a fatter paycheck. That's not what we want the practice of college admission to look like. So stay tuned for more on that, and particularly your admission practices committee colleagues. That will be a great link between the government relations group and the admission practices group. There'd be some really exciting joint activities that we can do together. Whoops, where did there we go. And then the last priority that we will really want to stay deep on and go even deeper on is supporting our school counselors and college advisors. Some of you may have seen these maps before. This is a research project we did a few years ago, so the data is a couple of years old now, but the map shows you in red where student to counselor ratios exceed 500 students per counselor. So that's the red school districts that are presented in this map. The green school districts are the ones that are either close to or at the 250 to 1 recommended student to counselor ratio, and the yellows are somewhere in between. I forget exactly what it is, but you can see that in Georgia, and this Georgia map is, it looks a lot like a lot of other states, that there's a lot of areas that are in real need of school counseling support and college advising support. So we want to continue the research that we did. You may or may not have heard of what we did. Gosh, it's probably been 5 years now, so it's probably helpful for me to do a quick recap, which is that we looked at statistical data from a Department of Education data set. And for students who worked one-on-one with a school counselor, they were 7 times more likely to fill out a FAFSA. They were 4 times more likely to enroll in any form of post-secondary education, and they were twice as likely to enroll in a 4-year college. And that's after factoring out all of the other things that could affect that equation, including family income and parental level of education. So what that means is that we all know that income and parents' level of education has an effect on whether students will go on, to college. But when you take that off the table, what that means is that school counselors actually do have an independent, statistically significant effect on students' college plans. So that's why it's so critical that we get students from our rural areas, students from our low-income areas, whether they're rural, whether they're urban, whether they're suburban. We need to get more school counselors and college advisors into those students so that they can make that same difference. So that's the kind of research that we're going to continue to build on, and we're going to continue to provide. I think you can kind of see how just having that data and having this information about student to counselor ratios, it really makes our narrative come alive. Because any school counselor can go in and talk about how the crazy day that they have to go through every day to just get to a handful of students, much less the ones they don't get to. And I'll say that one of my favorite moments in the history of my work here at NACAC was when I was watching Michelle Obama's final speech as First Lady of the United States. It was during National School Counselor Week. Well, it was actually a little bit before it, because it came before January 20th. But in any event, she cited NACAC's research from the podium. If you look at her speech, now she didn't say NACAC, but she did say the 7 times more likely to fill out a FAFSA, 4 times. And that's what you want out of policy. That's advocacy for you right there. We put that research out there, we advocate it, and then what do you know? It's in one of the most visible sort of platforms in our country. So that's kind of what we hope to do, and we hope to enable to equip you and your colleagues and other affiliates to continue to do that good work. Because I see from today, I mean, we've got 52 people on the call, right? That's amazing. You guys are doing such incredible work. It's it's incumbent upon us to support you in your efforts. Finally, I mentioned earlier, while we're going to be going deep on those 3 priorities, we're still going to care about all these things. We're not going anywhere from these things. College affordability, big issue. We may not be the financial aid administrators, all of us. We may not have the cutting edge research, but we certainly know the impact it has. We know the impact it has on admission offices, because we have to scramble around to try to figure out how we're going to assemble the class and still make revenue. So that's the kind of expertise we want to bring to this college affordability conversation. You've heard me talk about student protections and fraud and abuse. We're definitely, that's part of our ethics advocacy. DACA and DREAM Act, we're not letting that go, because my goodness, that's something we've worked on for going on 30 years now. And until that things get passed, we are not going to rest. Global student mobility, obviously international students are still really important to colleges and universities and to communities. I mean, we want to foster that international movement, whether it's to the US or even between other countries. We are looking at this from a global scope, and we think it's very important to promote mobility rather than limit it. And then finally, transfer pathways. And there's probably other issues that I haven't captured, but we want to make sure that we are mindful of all the different ways in which students move to and through post-secondary education. So all of these things are still going to be very much in the mix, but where you'll see the difference is in the depth of research and evidence that we gather for those first 3 priorities, because that really is where our expertise is. And this is the last slide, so we're done. This is the Twitter handle that I use, and really, it's been kind of a lifeline while we've been in this rebuilding period over the last year. This is where I post a lot of information about what NACAC's doing and what's going on in the community. We do try to put stuff in the bulletin. We try to get messages out to the affiliate chairs, and we'll be doing more of that in the coming months. But this is really kind of the breaking news feed that I try to keep current, and at least one post a day. So if you do follow it, you'll get a sense of where we are and what's happening. So with that in mind, if we have a few minutes, any questions you have or anything else that I can do, I'm happy to go over it. And I'll stop sharing the screen here.
So I have a question about the map that you showed earlier that, shows obviously much more red than we would like to see for understaffing. And you said that was a couple of years old. Is there any research happening? Have we seen any improvements on that? Obviously we care about Georgia, and I know you're looking nationwide, but have we seen any changes in that map?
That's a good question, Erin. The data is out there. We know from an aggregate level, we haven't seen a ton of movement. So like at the state level, but we haven't had a chance to go into that district level yet and really do the refresh of those maps. That's something we'll hope to do as we go through this evidence building process, because we should update it. And especially in Georgia, where you all have done such great work advocating for school counselors, it would be interesting to see if there's some movement there, because that would be a great outcome for us. And it would be great to build on that to advocate in the future.
David, just to piggyback off of Erin's question, is there a way that we would go find out, like if we're not in our local district's school system, how do we even know how many counselors are assigned per amount of students? Is that something we can look up?
Let me talk to our research team. This is a quick detour through the minutia of the Department of Education's data here in Washington. Basically, each state gathers that information and sends it to the Department of Education in DC. So theoretically, it exists at the state level. Not entirely sure where or in what form it might exist in a publicly accessible way. But the way in which we had to do it is we had to go through the department's massive database and download it all and then conform it to the district level. So there's a lot of I'll have to ask my researchers if we are able to pinpoint how you would go in and actually find that out, or if we would have to run it again and dump it into a spreadsheet like we did to back up this map. And I apologize, that's a lot of minutia, but it explains why the answer isn't an easy, oh, you just go here. but let me make that a follow-up, and I'll ask my research folks today what the mechanics would be, and then I'll follow up with you. Because it ought to be easy, don't you think? You ought to be able to see it, but.
I know that we have a fair few people on the call who are new to advocacy or new to getting to speak with their legislators, and we, have everybody planning to have these conversations with their legislators soon. What kind of advice would you give to someone who is going into one of these conversations for the first time?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, I'll repeat what I said earlier. You are the expert. I know it can feel intimidating going into a legislative office, and I even having been up here for 30 years as a professional and 22 for NACAC, going up on Capitol Hill still gives me a feeling of awe. You do, and state legislators as well. You do have this sense of, wow, this is bigger than me, and you're not wrong, right? But in a way, you're also bigger than it, because you are a constituent, number one. So these folks work for you. Number two, you are coming to talk about something that you care passionately about. Number three, you are an expert in this area. You know so much more than the person you're talking to, unless, let's say, that person has actually worked as a school counselor or a college admission officer, which we've seen, but they're few and far between. So you want to walk in there with a sense of confidence in that you are the expert. You know what you're doing, and you know what problems exist out there. You've seen it firsthand, which a lot of these people haven't. So that is really critical. In fact, Senator Durbin from Illinois spoke to a group of advocates a couple of years ago and said, you know, the 5 or 6 most powerful words that you can tell is let me tell you a story. So it's 6 words. That's one of the most powerful advocacy tools that he has experienced as a senator here in Washington. And here's a kind of a trick of the trade. You go in, you talk about what you know. They might try to, you know, you'll get some friendly offices that'll just sort of lap up what you're telling them. You'll get some offices that are cold or maybe even that challenge you a little bit. But you just have to remember, in any of those situations, you're just there to tell what you know, and no reaction is going to change that. You know it, you know it. There's no questions about it. If they start peppering you with questions, particularly if they're skeptical or if they're supportive, they may have questions for you. It is absolutely okay to say, let me get back to you on that. You don't have to have all the answers right then and there. In fact, one of the beautiful things about questions like that is that it creates the opportunity for a relationship, because you could try to answer it on the spot, and maybe you do, or maybe you just start making stuff up, which I've seen people do, not NACAC people, of course. You know, that could go either way. Maybe they take it, maybe they don't, maybe it increases your standing, maybe it doesn't. But if you say, let me get back to you, that gives you the opportunity to think about the question and come to somebody like me and my staff. We can help you. We can give you data. We can give you all sorts of information. Sometimes people will ask you, well, do you have any sort of proposed legislation in mind? We might just have it. So taking that opportunity to go back to them and create that relationship gives you the opportunity to then have another point of contact, and then they're going to contact you back to say thank you, and then you're going to say you're welcome. You know, keep me on your list if you have other questions like that. So that's, you know, don't be afraid to say I don't know, or to say I just would like to get back to you on that. So that's a quick. I could probably go on for a half hour on that one, Jackie, but that's an initial sort of shot.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for the great questions. I'm sure that you just got 1 million new Twitter followers, so we can continue to engage with you there. And then, of course, like through all the other methods that SACAC gives us to engage with NACAC and help you with your policy priorities. Thank you for that overview. I want to remind everyone that a lot of the things that were in the overview, you can dive deeper in using the webinars we sent you, referencing the Advocacy Packet, and on the NACAC website. All those reports that were listed, they were posted in the chat as well, but exploring the NACAC website, because I know I'm currently in school. Whenever I'm writing about like equity admissions, I start my search on the NACAC website, reading reports and using them as citations. So there's a lot of knowledge there to be shared. We're going to move into taking that brief 30-minute break. Emily and I are going to remain in this Zoom room. There's no need, you don't have to log out. We just want to give you time during the day. I know it's a lot to be on Zoom for a full day, to check your email, take a stretch, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. And then we're going to see you guys back here at 10:30. So thank you again so much, and looking forward to connecting with y'all very soon. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jade. And welcome back from your break, everybody. Thank you all again for joining us today and spending your time with us today. As we come together for Legislative Day year after year and familiarize ourselves with NACAC's policy priorities, it's important that we keep in mind the power of advocacy. As educators and counselors, we hold unique and profound power to use our voices to shape the future of our students and the future of democracy. Here to speak to us about the power of advocacy and all we can effectively use our voices and how we can effectively use our voices to shape and influence legislation is Reverend James Woodall. Reverend Woodall is a public policy associate for the Southern Center for Human Rights, founder and CEO of the Major Wish Group, LLC, and former state president of the Georgia NAACP. James is also an associate minister at Pleasant Grove Baptist Church in Marietta, Georgia. James also served as an intelligence analyst in the U.S. Army for 8 years. He ran for state representative in 2016, and he served on the state committee for the Democratic Party of Georgia. He previously served as the deputy campaign manager for Francie Johnson's 2018 bid for Congress, and as the legislative aide to State Representative Miriam Paris for 3 years in the Georgia Assembly. He has been named to Georgia Southern's 40 Under 40 and Alumnus of the Year in 2020, and was named a 2021 Atlanta 500 Leader by Atlanta Magazine. James is a fellow of the second class of the Civil Civility Fellowship, a partnership of ADL and the Aspen Institute, and a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. Reverend Woodall, I will turn it over to you now, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and apologies. I have this thing where my audio is not working, so I got two different faces going here, so just bear with me. But nevertheless, one, thank you for having me. I always enjoy you all's sessions. I remember the last session I held with several of you maybe a year or two ago. It seems like all of these years are kind of falling in together. But one, well, two, thank you, Shireen, for the invitation. I see a good friend of mine, Kayla Rogers, hails Southern. But nevertheless, now that the niceties are out the way and protocol has been established, really, when we talk about the power of advocacy and what does it mean to be effective down here at the state capitol under the Gold Dome, the number one word that comes to mind is relationships. Being able to call people and reach out to folks who you have a working relationship with, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, whether it's community, or even just organizationally. One of the things that I've seen in my years down here is being able to pick up the phone and talk to people, whether whatever side of the equation they follow on. It has been very impactful. It's been very effective in being able to get some things done. You always want to ensure that as you're engaging in the issues that you care about, you are able to provide evidence and research-based suggestions and recommendations, because that is ultimately what matters, and it is what communities in which we are all serving and seeking to help aid in the legislative process is when you're down here, you're able to point to where this is not only supported by facts and research, but equally it shows and demonstrates an ability for the decisions that the legislators make, how that would impact the daily lives of people we all claim to love and to support. And so, as you all know, many of you are professionals in the college and in higher education. As we find ourselves in this very unique moment of politics and society and social norms in which all things have kind of just been uplifted and uprooted, we have to be conscious of really the political climate in which we find ourselves, because there's difficulty often, and being able to have an impact on a scale that we all desire. But if we are able to, again, build the kind of relationships that would allow us to experience the kind of wins that we need for our communities, it would take us a very, very long way. So rather than me, spend a lot of time talking and lecturing and doing it, I really want to have an engaging conversation with you all about some of the experiences that you have and some of the desires that you have, and seeing how we can, best utilize our connections and our networks to make those kinds of things happen. So if that's appropriate, we can kind of open the floor and have more of a dialogue than anything.
Definitely. And I think y'all should feel free to take your microphones off mute and just ask the questions aloud. But if you prefer, if you place them in the chat, I'll definitely read them out loud. That way you won't have to navigate between too many screens, James. I do have, I think, a question that when I look back at my first legislative day, I was super thankful when I walked into my first meeting. It was with Rep. Marion Paris, and I walked in and you were in the room. I didn't know you were going to be there. And I was like, oh, I feel calmer because that's a face I know, even though I had no idea you would be there. But before that moment, I had a lot of imposter syndrome of like, am I the one that's supposed to be here? Should I be speaking on behalf of these students? I've only had like a 2-hour session about this and a breakfast. Am I the best to speak on behalf of students in my field? So can you give tips about kind of how to deal with imposter syndrome when you kind of begin your advocacy journey?
Well, I think when you talk about imposter syndrome, it really is the same in any professional space. One, you have to be confident that you are exactly where you need to be in this exact particular moment. And you deserve to be here just as well as anyone. And one of the other things I would say is you don't have to speak for students, right? Like that's a common phenomenon that, as leaders, we oftentimes get messed up on. But the students that you represent have a voice themselves, and your job is to help facilitate their ability to be in that space. And that is something that's very unique, as opposed to saying, I'm speaking on behalf of, whoever, however. One of the pieces of advice my mentor, Dr. Christopher Pugh gave me years ago, as he says, you can't speak for people who never elected you to speak for them. And I didn't understand what that meant until I got down here. It's like, you don't have to put that extra burden on yourself to speak. Speak to the experiences in which you are familiar with, and be able to provide the space necessary and the grace possible to ensure that folks who don't have this opportunity right in that very moment do get an opportunity at some point later down the line. But then also, going back to the question of, relationships, like as you engage those relationships, what information are you providing that is different than any other person, right? Being confident in what you have and the unique perspective in which you provide, I think is equally as powerful, because then you're not only bringing value to, a conversation or a discourse in which, there are policy implications embedded, but equally you have the opportunity to be able to demonstrate why you are exactly where you need to be in that present moment. Does that make sense?
Definitely did. Thank you so much for that.
All right. Let us not all speak at once.
I'll go ahead. Good to see you. It's easy, I think, to do this, year after year, or even just one time, and I think get discouraged, even though we expect change does not happen overnight, and that things are not always going to go the way that we may go into the situation wanting them to go. How do you keep yourself, I guess, motivated and encouraged to continue these conversations and to continue advocating on behalf of policy and things like that, even when you see things not going the way you hope?
Well, one, being a preacher, my hope is built on nothing less, right? Like, my hope is not coming from this process. My hope doesn't come from this space. I find joy in going back to community and just seeing people live their lives, right? Inconsequential of anything that we do here. Now, what I will say is there is value in the work that we do. And we all know, on all sides of the equation, again, that you won't get everything that you're fighting for. But if you're not in this space to be able to fight, then you won't get anything at all. And so, in a real sense, I kind of find myself in an interesting place, because most people hate being down here, and I love being down here because you just see as we say in the military, we see the sausage being made. And if we're able to, see a bill that does impact people, a piece of legislation that does have a positive impact on people, and we play some minuscule role, that's just as important as us fighting against some of the more drastic and draconian measures that we see coming out of the General Assembly each and every year. I mean, we can go down a list of things that you may see in the media that we've actively worked against. I mean, you may not hear about it, you may not see it, but it hurts us just as well as those persons who are directly impacted by some of these policy decisions, because we know how it will impact our communities. And so you take the good with the gander, as my grandmother would always say, and you hope that the little that you have done actually have made it a world of difference to someone. And that is what keeps you going. That is what you look forward to every day you wake up. And it's not always easy. It's long days at times. I mean, we got some days that we're here. I know, like on crossover day and Sine Die, which is the last day of the session, we're here from sometimes 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning until about midnight. But that's fun, because you see a lot of things happening in a short amount of time. And then on the positive side, just as a policy advocate, I know you all are not here all 40 days, but it's beautiful to be able to have, like 2-3 months out of the year where it's all work, and then the rest of the year you're kind of in autopilot as it relates to policy making on the state level. So that's a bonus add to the job. But some of us got to go back to work throughout the rest of the year too. So I see Brett has his hand up.
Yeah, related to that, I live in a part of the area where if you bring up need-based aid, my state senator and my state rep say, well, hope's plenty. And could you speak to going back to the same legislators year after year, even though you're going to get a no? It's my job just to annoy them to the point that they are aware of the issue. Just kind of speak to that.
Well, Shireen and Caleb will tell you is I don't really take no for an answer. We were, I think the year was, I want to say 2013, 2014, when we were in the state. I don't think Shireen, you were in the state Senate, but Caleb and I was. And I know we all did sort together, but I ran for state representative as a college senior. And that was a product of a policy decision our state representative, Jan Tangersley, had made relating to guns on campus. We've taken a vote in the college Senate to basically say we do not support this. We think it's dangerous. Our college administration said they didn't want this. Our college university police said they didn't want it. And she voted for it. And I said, well, what's the point of you being down here if you're not going to represent the people that you claim to represent? So I ran against her. And that was my introduction really to politics on the state level. And granted, I got my behind beat. Like it was bad. But what we did have is the most turnout in that election from students on that campus, I think, in nearly 20 years. And in the previous time that we had the highest turnout was because college, the community surrounding Georgia Southern wanted to allow for package sales. I mean, not package sales. They wanted to allow for, wine and beer and things like that at restaurants. And college students, they wanted to have what they wanted to have, and they turned out to vote. And we were able to get that passed. And so it goes to show you that people are paying attention and they mobilize around, things that matter to them. And so being able to identify those soft spots for, key community groups for our legislators is very, very important. But they also, we have to be mindful of this, they also know who their key constituency groups are. And so in being able to, join forces with some of those groups, and you may not align with them on everything, but I think at least being able to have open lines of communication is critically important to be able to have impact and effect in your agenda. Thanks for that question, Britt.
We have another question that came in the chat. Whenever you are looking back at your own experiences advocating, what factors influence your best conversations and interactions, and what factors influence some of your less great ones?
I think, ask the question one more time. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. So whenever you're thinking about conversations you've had in the past, experiences that you have had in the past working in advocacy, what are some of the factors that you think have led to successful conversations and interactions that you've had? And what are some of the situations surrounding some of your conversations that haven't gone as well? Or what are things that you think you could have changed in the way you presented those situations that didn't go as well?
I'll start with the negative first. So, it's very often you have conversation and dialogue with people who don't see the world like you at all. They don't show up in the world like you at all. And I think the factors that have made this journey, interesting is that I don't take anything personal. There are people who say some very bigoted things. There are people who say some very nasty things in response to like policy-led questions, philosophical questions. And I just don't take it personal. But what I do have an understanding of is you want to be able to show up. And when you show up, people know exactly who you are and why you're there. Right? You want to be very consistent in that space. But when it comes to, the most impactful moments that I've had, I go back to just last year, spring of 2021, where we had spent nearly 8 months working on a piece of legislation after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And, it didn't really make, it made some media fanfare, if you will, but, in the larger scale of things, most people don't even remember that or recognize it, but being able to use what is happening in real time to inform the ways we engage under the Gold Dome. I mean, when you look at that, that situation, looking at every element or every pattern of fact within that situation or that incident, and being able to address the failures of state law under the Gold Dome, I think that is impactful. And to see that process play out, I think that was probably the first bill that I had worked on as an advocate that went through the entire process and made it into law. And so that was like a very unique moment for me. And just working with some amazing leaders. I know our policy director at the time, Marissa McCall-Dotson, she was very instrumental in, getting that law passed and really getting it through the entire process. And without her, without Ahmad's mother, without, the coalition of organizers, lawyers, activists, and the Just Georgia Coalition, heavily informing how we engage under the Gold Dome. That's why I say it's not just you showing up, but at the same time, you don't have to speak for people because they'll speak for themselves. You just show up and bring your full self to the moment, and hopefully you get something done. And so you have to be strategic, you have to be patient as well as disciplined, but most of all, persistent in your call to action.
We had another question that came in. As someone who may get to advocate to the people that represent us, do you have keywords that seem to grab their attention? I sometimes feel like I'm talking into a void and may not get any response from my own legislators. Are there special things that I could say to better my odds of beginning a relationship with my elected officials?
Yeah, so one of two things. One is you never want to talk about mandates. It seems like no legislator wants to mandate someone do anything outside of not doing crime. It seems like they're hell-bent on mandating all kinds of human behaviors into crimes. But outside of that, and I just say that because that's just the discipline in which we work in now. But outside of that, you normally never, and this is a strategy I've always used, you never want to start your advocacy with the policy. And that's different than what most people would suggest. They say, you don't have a lot of time, you want to just get straight to the point. And maybe that's true, but if you're actually seeking to build a relationship with this person and work with them over a long period of time, as opposed to, just showing up and say, hey, I got this piece of legislation, they're like, I don't know who you are. So, really try to get to know that person, not just in the 10, 15 minutes you have, but establish an actual rapport. And you're more likely to get some movement on this long term than as opposed to you just stopping in for, a lobby day. And those things are important too, but you want to establish relationships because this might not be the only advocacy that you need to be impactful in the work that you do. And so rather than having to come down here, you can literally just pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, this is something I care deeply about. And they'll probably ask you for more details and more evidence and research. And then that way you may be invited to come testify on a special occasion that's not a lobby day, right? Because most of the work that we see here happens in committees. And so again, going back to the relationships, making sure that you establish that rapport over a longer period of time to be able to have a long-term impact in the work that you do. All right, got any more questions?
I do have one more in the chat right here. How do you balance being passionate about an area that you're advocating for, but also keeping your communication and demeanor in a way that keeps your audience's ear? Do you see yourself leading more with passion or more with logic, or is it a combination?
I would say it's neither. You want to use facts. One of the strategies I learned in the military is it's often difficult for you to lead with emotion and feelings in spaces in which power is being negotiated. It's very, and I say it again, it's very difficult to lead with passionate feelings in a space where power is being negotiated. And so it's important that you lead with the facts, with the evidence. And, it's very difficult as a human being to not be emotional or be emotional. Like that's not what I'm suggesting. However, what I am saying, there's gonna be times like I remember we were sitting in a meeting and one of the legislators basically said, I don't know what you're doing with these hands, but and then went on talking about something else. But you can't negotiate with facts, even though some people do want to in this moment. You can't, debate numbers. You can't debate, what's the truth. And so you want to make sure that everything that you do is informed by those things. And then leave the emotions and feelings for after you present the facts and because that is equally important too. But I just want to make sure you leave, with, I don't feel like when you testify, you don't want to say, oh, I feel like, or I believe, or, this is what I know. I know that this is happening. I know that this is happening. This is what the experience is. And this is what I propose we do about it, and talk to the actual bill, talk to the actual policy, as opposed to, the anecdotal kind of suggestions that don't have anything to do with the topic of the conversation.
I do have a question, one more question for you. Is there a piece of legislation that we should have our eyes on right now as educators in the state of Georgia?
For sure. I mean, yes. We have several. One is the budget, right? Like that is the constitutional requirement of the General Assembly each and every session is to pass a budget. And you may see, and I'll put it in the chat, where gbpi.org is an organization that does a lot of budgetary analysis, and particularly Dr. Stephen Owens does a great job on analyzing how the K-12 as well as the higher education system is being funded. And one of the things that you will probably have heard already is just the simple fact that we have not done a great job or good job or even an okay job with adequately resourcing our system from K-12 to higher ed. And we saw during the supplemental calendar year, I think it was 2020, these years get caught up with me because of the pandemic, but I think it was 2020 where we saw, the budget cut, or there was austerity cuts because of the pandemic. And then we saw the budget restore some of those cuts that following year. But what we have, even better, Emily, thank you. What we had was, prior to that, about $10 billion taken from K-12 public education the previous 10 years. And so you got $10 billion taken, you have several $billion taken, because of the pandemic, and then you restore about one or two, and you're still at a deficit when it comes to fully funding education. And so one of the things that we've seen educators and advocates pushing for is a reevaluation of the quality basic education QBE formula to be able to get fully funded public education. Second thing I'll say is, of course, the CRT, book burning, this whole conversation. It would be helpful to know how many folks who are having this conversation actually has experienced a curriculum of critical race theory. I have, as a public theologian. Most people haven't, unless they're in law or they're in theology, and that's not K through 12, right? That is postgraduate. That's post undergraduate work, and so that is something that is an ongoing conversation. And the final thing is the question of school vouchers, school choice. That is a more nuanced conversation for sure. But that I don't know if something I haven't really been following along with those conversations as it relates to the various voucher program proposals. But that would be the other thing I would probably suggest you all take a look at. And tell Steve and Dr. Owen that I spoke. I didn't talk about him too bad. I promise.
Definitely. James, thank you so much for sharing and answering all those questions. Before I let you go completely, is there anything you want to share with us, ways that we can follow you? I know I follow your Twitter, so I can keep up with some of the work you're doing. Is there anything you want to share that we could follow you on, kind of keep up with your work, and maybe get some advocacy tips on the sly as you share what the work you're doing?
For sure. One, I would plug the Southern Center for Human Rights. If you're looking for, like a criminal legal advocacy organization to follow, is at Southern Center on Twitter. And I think it's at Southern Center on Instagram as well. And, we kind of do very, not random, but we do periodic updates. And so you can follow us on those platforms. You can follow my personal platform at I Made Your Wish. I tend to amplify not only my own but various coalition work like the Georgia Justice, or well, let me make sure, JRP, Justice Reform Partnership, as well as the Just Georgia Coalition, which Southern Center is a part of as well. And then, various organizations, various efforts, various activists, organizers, advocates. I try to, be intentional by ensuring that we're amplifying the voices of people who are in the space, because it's not just one or two of us. It's not just, me or my partner in crime, Caitlin here, but it's all of us. And so, we work in a coalition all the time, and, it may not be our wheelhouse, but if you have questions about, something that you may have heard about, if we don't know the answer to it, we know someone who probably will. So that is what I would suggest. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that and for those resources. We really appreciate your helpful tips. We appreciate you coming back to see us virtually. And again, hopefully, as we get back to in-person things, we'll have you come back next year or the year after to connect with us, because it's always definitely a treat. We're going to start to move into breakout rooms now to discuss some of our NACAC priorities more deeply. So in a moment, you're going to see some breakout rooms pop up in the screen. You're going to be able to choose between need-based financial aid, student-to-counselor ratios, student protections, and DACA, and test optional admissions as breakout rooms. Like I said, you can choose anywhere, not assigning which breakout room you can go to. And if you're really interested in more than one topic, or you want to deep dive a few, feel free to move in between those breakout rooms. We're going to be in there for about 30 minutes, and we'll call you back at the end of that. And then at the end of that time, we'll have a screen break. So at the end of that 30 minutes, you'll have another little break before we move into our session with Dr. Stephen Owens and Jennifer Lee from the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. James segued that for us perfectly. That is during the lunch hour. And I know after 2 years on Zoom, it's sometimes hard to look at yourself all day in Zoom, and nobody wants to look at themselves eat, I'm sure. But I want to point out that we know it's lunch. We want you to treat it as a lunch and learn. Feel free to bring your lunch. I'm going to let you know I'll be eating a salad on the screen, because I really, really appreciate lunch breaks. I take them very seriously. So we would love to have you there, enjoying your lunch, asking questions, and learning a little bit more about that budget process and understanding the budget document and the work they do in that office. So I think Emily's going to get those breakout rooms up on the screen, and you'll be able to join one, and we'll get started on our next portion of the program. If you guys are having any trouble joining breakout rooms, let us know too. If you remain in the background, we can assign you manually if that's going to be needed. So know that we're going to remain here and help you out as you're trying to join them.
Again, if anyone needs assistance with getting into a room, just message us and we'd be happy to get you moved. Here we go again, y'all. Welcome back. Welcome back. It was just a practice round. Welcome back. Hope you had a great lunch. Feel free to eat during this next session. As I mentioned, it is lunch and learn style. So sorry that I've been on mute. I am so excited and honored to introduce our next group of presenters. As our committee was talking about who we wanted to hear from at today's Legislative Day program, to hear about the current education policy landscape in Georgia, there was honestly no question that we had to ask these next two presenters. It was a no-brainer. Stephen Owens and Jennifer Lee are senior policy analysts at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to advance lasting solutions that expand economic opportunity and well-being for all Georgians. Dr. Owens focuses on state policies and research that affect public K-12 education in Georgia. Prior to joining GBPI in 2018, Stephen was a research and data analyst at the Georgia Department of Education. He created data visualizations to help district and state policymakers better understand school outcomes, assisted in the creation of Georgia's plan to implement federal education legislation, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and produced analyses that shape public policy for Georgia's schools. Stephen graduated from the University of Georgia, where he holds a doctorate with a focus on education policy. His dissertation centered on state-level agenda information. Jennifer Lee is a senior policy analyst for higher education at GBPI, where she focuses on state policies that provide Georgians greater opportunity to complete a higher education credential, regardless of race, ethnicity, and family income. Prior to joining GBPI in 2017, she was a research associate and director of the Texas Kids Count Project at the Center for Public Policy Priorities in Austin, Texas. She graduated from Wellesley College and holds a master's in public affairs at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Stephen, Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. We are delighted to have you and look forward to your presentation. You're welcome to share your screens.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about our work. I'll go first and just give an update around the budget for K-12 schools, some of the policies that we're following at GBPI, and then hand over to Jennifer Lee for the same before we move to question and response, because I can't promise that I'll have any of y'all's answers. I am going to share my screen, but it says I cannot while because somebody else is sharing. I see that.
Should be good now.
Thank you so much. All right. So, as mentioned, Jennifer and I work at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And what that looks like year round is different. During General Assembly, we are registered lobbyists who are advocating for specific policies and or to stop other policies that we feel like aren't benefiting all Georgians. But our true focus, I mean, it's our middle name, is the budget, is this expectation that the way the state spends, $30 billion is a moral document that shows whom is being favored and who is being left out of the state's wealth. So just a quick rundown of what that budget looks like for K-12 schools. This is the numbers from the governor's proposed budget. So in Georgia, the governor will hand his budget to the legislature, and then after they have made their edits, we'll go back to the governor where he has the ability to veto, line item veto, sign the bill 40 days after the legislature convenes. Puts the governor in a really powerful position, and it's one of the reasons that we're going to highlight that so heavily here. But this is in the process right now in the House of being heard. And the governor's budget includes $383 million to restore specific cuts to the public education system. The state of Georgia has made cuts to public schools in 18 of the last 20 years, totaling $10 billion. If this budget passes, that would undo last year's cut to the amended budget and then restore this year's cut so that there are no specific removal of funds moving forward. It doesn't necessarily mean that schools have everything they need for all kids to thrive. It just means that there won't be that specific line item cut moving forward. It also includes $287 million for a teacher pay raise, which would take effect September 1st. I bring this up only because the fiscal year starts July 1st. And so by starting this raise in September, this means there would actually year one be more like a $1,667 raise. The governor's office did something similar with a $3,000 raise in Governor Kemp's first year. The budget includes about $300 million in savings in the local 5 mil share and the equalization grant. Long story short, these two grants show how much money is being raised through local property taxes, and then how much wealth is in the community per student. And so the story from these two savings is that property values are going up statewide, and they're going up a little faster in quote unquote low wealth communities. And so consider like Clayton County, where I spent elementary school, has a lot lower property values per student than Fayette County, where I went to middle and high school. And so this would mean like the Clayton counties of this world are catching up a little bit in this budget to the Fayette counties. This is the first time I've seen it as I've been following the budget where we've actually had a little bit of that leveling off. It also includes $43 million to recognize student enrollment growth from past years, and then $6.3 million for pupil transportation to include raises. And that highlighting of pupil transportation is not a mistake because whenever I talk to folks at the school level, especially budget writers, they will mention that if they don't have enough money to start buses, to pay drivers to get to and from the school, then that money has to come from somewhere. You essentially have to rob Peter to pay Paul. And so where does that money come from? We know that 70 cents of every dollar that's spent in Georgia public education goes inside the classroom. So if you need to, over 20 years, spend $450 million more statewide at the local level, just to bus kids to and from school, that means higher class sizes. That means fewer accommodations for students. That means fewer tutors, after school programs. I mean, all the other ways that you kind of have to make the budget work. And you can see that in these gold bars, that's the amount of state funding that's gone practically unchanged since Bill Clinton was in office, while the cost to districts goes up year after year. Now, the governor's proposed budget does include a significant bump in student transportation in the amended budget to replace buses, which is great, but we're always going to continue to fight for formulaic changes, so we don't have to wait to just see like kind of what money is left over. Can we do that, give that to the schools, but rather make this a regular part of the way the state funds public education. One of the big missing pieces to the way that we fund schools in Georgia is that Georgia is one of only 6 states nationwide which does not provide additional funding specifically to educate students living in poverty. When Georgia created the way that we fund schools in the early 1980s, it was built very progressively and included the first year of implementation, and $1 billion extra went to public schools that year. There were a lot of provisions which were kind of ahead of their time. Since then, education research, our eyes have taught us as well, just like what is the #1 challenge to an equitable education. And it's the fact that we have students coming from very different places as far as how much wealth and resources their parents have access to. And so in the same way that we build in additional funding to how we educate students with disabilities, students who are learning English, there's this idea that we need to have more resources in order to get kids to equal outcomes, or that's the desire or goal rather. We do not do that for poverty. And we're one of only 6 states that fails to do that. So House Bill 10 is a bill that I've worked with Representative Scott to try to get a hearing for this year to raise awareness of this exact thing. It would provide $343 million to every school in the state based on the number of kids they have that are directly certified for free lunch. So that's a homeless, foster, migrant, unaccompanied, or their parents receive SNAP or TANF. So again, that's the free part of free and reduced lunch, in a hope for Georgia to not even enter into the 21st century, but maybe enter the 20th century in the way that we fund schools. So what does this budget look like specifically in the area of school counselors? In 2020, the governor's budget and House budget included $25 million additionally to fund more school counselor positions statewide. This is important because Georgia, the way that we fund schools includes one school counselor for every 450 students in the building. It doesn't mean that that's how your district has to spend the money, but that's built into the way that we fund each of the programs. And we didn't even have enough money to do that until 2020. Something happened in 2020, which rocked the budget, called the novel coronavirus. But even when it came back and when we've had billions in additional funds this year, that amount still hasn't been added back. So we're still $25 million away from even paying districts for one school counselor for every 450 students. Another reason this is a problem is because the ASCA recommends a ratio of 1 to 250. So I was able to write a blog in the spring of 2020 showing that not only is this an issue just all the time in Georgia schools, but the fact that we are in a national crisis demands this increased investment into school counselors as a way to recognize the amazing toll that has happened on our families and our children specifically. And there are other groups that are working in this area as well. I know Science for Georgia, I know Georgia Youth Justice Coalition are working in this area as well. How can we highlight the need for the support inside the school that Georgia continues to fall behind our neighbor states in as far as how much we allocate specifically for the school counselor's position. Some other things that we're watching specifically and being supportive of our partners in are these censorship bills, which do not mention critical race theory, but even the authors of the bills have said, this has come as a response to people reaching out and saying that they're nervous about critical race theory as an aside, which is a complex legal theory that is not taught in Georgia's schools. So these 4 bills would all attempt to ban quote unquote divisive materials. And we don't have to spend too much time about what those are, but the bills usually follow a pretty similar formula, which is list out these divisive concepts, like that the United States is structurally racist, that someone should feel bad because of the color of his or her skin. And then say, if you teach these things, there will be consequences. There will be a due process. Some of these include financial penalties to the schools. House Bill 888 would, if you are found to be teaching divisive topics, you would lose 20% of all your state funding. So think about $2 billion plus. Senate Bill 377, which had a hearing on Monday, it would have a 10% cut. So think a little over $1 billion cut from schools, or on the line rather. House Bill 1084 is in a hearing right now, and this would include removal of certain legal waivers that school districts have. So removal of some of that local school flexibility if you're found. And then 375 is very similar, and you'll hear a little bit more about that, I'm sure, as they make its way through the system. I bring this up because of this belief that the debate right now and the words that are being spoken by our lawmakers have consequences, and that students are not blind to the way that they are being talked about inside the Georgia General Assembly, specifically the fact that we have a student body which is majority students of color. And it feels like their voices are kind of completely ignored in this entire debate as we talk about who is uncomfortable. Because I've yet to hear someone say oh, are we asking kids who are growing up in Jeff Davis County if they're uncomfortable with going to school in a place named after a domestic terrorist which fought to enslave their ancestors. So this is one reason I bring this up, because I do believe that there's a consequence to the way that we talk about specifically kids in traditionally marginalized groups. One policy the GVI has a longstanding position against is the idea of private school vouchers, the idea of using public funds for private schools. There are 2 bills that we are watching right now. House Bill 60, which is sitting in the Rules Committee, which could be called and voted on in the full House chamber any day, projected to divert about $288 million annually once it is fully hits its enrollment cap. House Bill 999 is in the full House committee. This has no cap. It's subject to appropriation. It would provide $6,000 per academic year. To give you an example of what that looks like, if the General Assembly were to pass this and then provide funding for it, to do this for 8,400 students would be about $50 million annually. This is in a time when we know there are so many needs for state funding inside the public school system, which our lawmakers are constitutionally required to support. So what does this look like kind of day to day? GBPI is the lead organization, interim lead, for a new coalition called Fund Georgia's Future. And you can look at what our vision looks like. It does have a specific focus on fair and full funding, but with commitments to inclusivity about how we create the budget, about how school districts, about how principals, teachers, how you engage communities, specifically those communities who are traditionally left out of these sorts of decisions, a commitment to acknowledging and dismantling historical systems of marginalization in education. Of course, that includes racism, but also ableism, the way that we talk about people based on their religion or gender identity. And then commitments under full funding to maintain public schools and also to regularly see the costs that are needed in order to grow it. Like, what are the things that are needed in the next decade that didn't show up in the last as far as school funding and needs are. And you can see our website there. And we also have links that if you'd like to apply to join the coalition as an individual or a part of a group. But also every week on Fridays at 2, we have weekly downloads of what happened in education policy this week, where we just quickly run through, here are all the bills that were talked about, here's their impact, here's where they're going next, here are resources if you'd like to help support or try and kill the bill. So that is Fund Georgia's Future. I had a question slide, but we'll get to questions after Jennifer. And with that, I will hand it off to my colleague, Jennifer Lee.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, feel free to, my name is Jennifer Lee, and I'm the higher ed side of the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. I've had the great fortune of being able to work with some of your members who are great, so I'm a big fan of SACAC, so thank you so much for inviting me. Stephen is a great resource for K-12. I will embarrass him now in saying that if you are on TikTok, he has a very popular and great, like, I see some head nods, so Stephen, you already have some, I don't actually do TikTok, so I don't know what they're called, followers, fans on
Real
TikTok.
talk, this is either going to be the reason that I do well in this profession or get fired. Like, there's only two futures here. Sorry.
Yeah, you know, high risk, high reward, right? So yeah, so definitely follow him on TikTok if you're not. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the higher ed side and talk about start with the budget first and how that affects college affordability and access here in Georgia. And then I'll move into a couple of issues and bills that I'm watching as well. So first, talking a little bit about the budget, Stephen did a great overview of the K-12 budget. And in terms of looking at college affordability and access, I like to make sure that people sort of understand the two different ways that funding in our state budget affects students, because there are two different ways. One is how we fund our colleges. So the funding colleges and universities, although it seems more indirect, is actually really important for college access and affordability for a variety of reasons. what is that, once you send your high schoolers to college, you want to make sure that they're going to a college that has the appropriate resources and supports that mean they're going to succeed there. When we're talking about high school counselor ratios, I don't even know what the ratios for counselors and advisors is at colleges and universities, but I consistently hear, and research has borne out, that a very high impact area in terms of both need and benefit is having a high quality advisor, both for academics, financial aid, and also mental health support and counseling. And so colleges and universities can only do that if they have the funding to do that. And unfortunately, that is an area sometimes when the budget is tight that colleges and universities will tend to cut first. So that's one area that I think is important to know, just in terms of the general strength of funding to colleges and universities. A really clear case study of that this year in terms of strength of funding to colleges and universities is something that's a little wonky, but it's called the special institutional fee. And so basically what I like to think of, people talk about the cost of higher education going up, and that is true for students. But when you look at the big picture, the general cost of what does it take to educate a college student in Georgia generally hasn't really gone up that much per student when you're looking especially at public colleges and universities. The picture might look a little bit different in some private colleges and universities, but public colleges and universities are fairly constrained with their funding and tuition. And so what they're spending per student has largely been similar. What has changed a lot in the past 20 years or so is how much of that cost students are paying themselves through tuition. So there is a portion of the cost of their education that students pay, and then there's a portion of the cost, and they pay it through tuition and fees, and then there's a portion of the cost that the state pays through public funding to colleges and universities, because students aren't paying the full cost of their education at a public college or university. So that portion that students have been paying has nearly doubled in the last 10 years, which is why we've seen tuition go up so much. One of the big drivers of that cost is something called the special institutional fee, and that was implemented in Georgia in 2011 after the big budget cuts of the last Great Recession. And it was supposed to be temporary. It's called a fee, but it's actually tuition. It's used for just general educational costs like faculty and staff, at just general college operating costs at institutions. And it's typically the largest fee students pay. So it makes up about 40% of mandatory fees for students. So like at Georgia State University, for example, I think it's like $400 or $450 per semester. So that's a lot of money for fees. And when people are talking about like how much their fees are, a lot of it is special institutional fee. But the colleges and universities were using that, and they were calling it a fee just to make up for budget cuts, frankly. And the university system is very straightforward about this. They said, yeah, we did it because our budgets got cut, so we're making it up. This year, one of the really bright spots for me in the budget is that the legislature, the governor's budget proposal that's currently working its way through, has $230 million to pay for the special institutional fee for students. So basically, this would wipe off that fee from students' tuition bills. There would be no more special institutional fee, and then the state would actually just direct that money to colleges and universities to make up for the loss of that funding. So that's huge. It's going to be huge for students. It's going to hold colleges and universities harmless so that they're not like losing the funding they would have gotten from that fee. And so I'm feeling pretty good about that. But, of course, it has to move through the budget process. So we'll see how it works out. But that's a great thing that's in the budget this year. And is, I think, just a really clear example of how, state funding is directly tied to institutional strength and student affordability. The other side of funding that people are probably, that is more direct for student affordability that people are probably more familiar with is the HOPE programs. So the lottery funded programs, and this money is going like directly to students. It's not indirect through colleges and universities. And this year there were several changes to the HOPE program that have been proposed in the budget to be aware of. So the first is that the HOPE scholarship program for bachelor's and associate degrees that most of you all are probably familiar with actually was paying a different percentage of tuition at different colleges and universities. So the proposal in the budget is that it would make HOPE scholarship would now pay for 90% of tuition at all Georgia public colleges and universities. So HOPE is, again, pretty generous, and it would cover 90% at all public colleges and universities. There were a lot of schools that were already 90 or close to 90. And the three biggest changes, schools that would be affected would be Georgia Tech, the University of Georgia, and technical colleges. They had the lowest HOPE rate. So technical colleges, HOPE grants were 76% of tuition. That's going to go up to 90. UGA and Georgia Tech were both in like the high 70s, and now they'll go up to 90. So that's something in the budget for if passed, which would be implemented for the next year. On the technical college side, there is a program called HOPE Career Grants, which is a supplemental grant on top of the HOPE grant, which effectively results in full 100% of your tuition being covered in what the state has identified as like quote unquote high demand career areas. This is only for certificate and diploma level programs. And about half of technical college students are currently enrolled in one of these free tuition, high demand career areas. There was a small increase in the governor's budget this year to add law enforcement and criminal justice related certificate and diploma programs into HOPE Career Grant. So that was included in the budget this year. It wasn't very expensive. It required a small increase. And then the other, I guess, non-change to be aware of is that there is a separate pot of money for HOPE scholarships at private colleges and universities. HOPE scholarships for privates isn't set at, a percentage, because frankly, that would be very expensive for the state if we were covering 90% of tuition at certain private colleges and universities. Usually they will see like some amount of increase. Well, actually, I'm not sure if usually is correct, but it's not uncommon for, HOPE privates to have the HOPE private portion to have some type of increase. But this year, the HOPE private portion was flat. So there was no additional funding allocated for HOPE scholarships for students who attended private colleges and universities. The last thing to note about the lottery, and some of you know this is just like a pet peeve of mine, is that the state has a huge lottery reserves. So it goes up every year. This year, the lottery reserves is like $1 billion. And it's just at the end of every year, they don't spend all of the money allocated. That's normal budget practice because they don't want to like they don't want to overcommit. So there's always a little differential, right? And they save it and they've been stocking it away. And now it's like $1 billion, but it's just sitting there. And so there is a certain amount that is statutorily required to cover shortfalls in HOPE, which is a totally reasonable policy. You know, you want to be able to follow through with your commitments to HOPE in case like there's some, I don't know, unforeseen disaster that happens with lottery. But we have way more than we need to in lottery reserves. And so that again is pet peeve of mine. So that's the budget. The budget is, again, I think just a really important part of what we do and sort of an undervalued part of the whole legislative process. I'm going to move on to a few bills and issues that may be of interest to you. So the first is a couple of bills that would strengthen the HOPE grants program, and that's for technical colleges and certificates. So that's HB 87 and 88. I mentioned adding HOPE career grants to the, or adding criminal justice and law enforcement to the HOPE career grants program. HB 87 and 88, I think there are a variety of ways to strengthen the HOPE grants program. One would be to just have HOPE grants cover full tuition for all technical college certificate and diploma students. Frankly, this would be very inexpensive for the state to do because technical college tuition is relatively low. And we are already covering 100% tuition for about half of our technical college students. So that's an approach we could take. I've also talked to technical college students who struggle with the fee portion in addition to tuition. Fees always come up as an issue for students, especially in some technical college fields. There can be like a lot of fees that add up, especially if you're in, for example, some sort of allied health field and you have a lot of fees needed for, you know, things like uniforms, or you even have to get certain like medical tests and things like that if you are part of some of the health professions, exams that you're required to take. There's just like a variety of fees that we could also cover, I think, under the HOPE grants program in addition to tuition. And then another thing that I've been looking at and tracking as well is that over time, more and more students at technical colleges have been choosing to pursue 2-year associate's degrees. And that is not covered under the HOPE grants program. It is covered under HOPE scholarships, but many students aren't able to meet the HOPE scholarship requirement, which is a little more stringent. And so that's another approach that I've been looking at. The second issue that I know a lot of you have interest in is in-state tuition access for DACA and other undocumented students. So currently there's 2 bills, HB 120 and SB 460, that look at that issue. They're slightly different. SB 460 is a little more straightforward and I think just would like make DACA students eligible for in-state. And then HB 120 has a slightly different approach where it sort of tells the Board of Regents that they should set a special tuition rate basically for DACA students that's between like, that's not in-state, but it's like 105, you know, it's like 5% higher or something like that. I don't know, just like a political reason, I think. And then, but those are 2 bills that are related to in-state tuition access for DACA students. Another issue that has popped up that might be of interest is that there were 2 bills related to a school-wide SAT or ACT testing day. So those bills are HB 1184 and SB 452. And those bills basically establish, I mean, what it says, it's a school-wide SAT or ACT day that happens during the school day. The bill says that it would be funded so that students aren't paying for the exam, but there's no like budget appropriation that corresponds with that right now. I think maybe the folks behind the bill are trying to kind of get discussion and legislation first and hopefully get something in the budget. But it wouldn't be required of schools. But it would it's just kind of an effort to provide more access, I think, to SAT or ACT during the day. And then, and then the last bill, I actually wasn't sure if you'd be interested in this or not, but there was literally just a hearing like an hour ago on it, so it's top of mind. It is also in the budget that would change an existing program to basically be a different program that would pay for high school equivalency exams for students. So GED test takers, now we have HiSET also, would pay for those test taking costs, which I think right now are like $40 or $50 per content area. And then the full GED exam is like 4 or 5 different content areas. So it can add up. It can be like $200. And sometimes if you don't pass, you have to like retake. So that's, there is money in the budget for that, but I haven't actually seen the details yet in the legislation related to that. Stephen mentioned the divisive concepts bill, so I'll just touch on that briefly. Also, SB 377, I think, is the only bill that includes a higher ed component, but it is quite concerning. It focuses on diversity and inclusion training for faculty and staff at colleges and universities, and threatens the loss of not only state funding to colleges, but also funding for scholarships, loans, and grants for all students who attend those colleges and universities. So that's quite concerning. And I think, again, I think that's the only bill that has a higher ed component. But just to highlight that, since most of the focus has been on the K-12 side. So I'll just pause here and see if anyone has any questions for either Stephen or I. I know that we covered a lot, but please feel free to ask questions.
Can you repeat the name of the bill that you just mentioned about the diversity training for higher education?
It's SB 377, right, Stephen? Is it 377?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, about those bills, the authors, when pressed in hearings about them, have both times, the 2 hearings, one that's going on right now, one that happened on Monday, have like quickly said that this is not the final form of these bills. That's a little annoying to me as a person who gets paid to watch these hearings. But we will probably see, we'll say, substantial edits to these before a product makes it across a chamber is what I would expect. But still, we treat them as, you know, we take folks at their word that this is what they want. And so that's one reason that we continue to follow these bills pretty closely.
And something that Stephen has highlighted, I know in some of his speaking engagements before, which I think is also important to know, is that often the purpose of some of these bills is not actually to pass, but to send a message to schools. We see this a lot, frankly, in higher ed. There are a lot of, because of the way that higher ed governance works, the Board of Regents and colleges and universities are very sensitive very sensitive to what the legislature thinks of them because they control so much of their funding. And so often a piece of legislation doesn't have to pass in order for a college or university to take an action to respond to a concern or not take an action to respond to their concern. I mean, we've seen this very directly in some of the coronavirus policies, that there has been no like there wasn't like legislation, but there was an understanding, I guess, and a message from about how you know, certain folks felt about what colleges and universities should or should not do to respond to coronavirus.
To the question in the chat, yes, so the Intercultural Development and Research Association has a great breakdown of the 4 bills and what they share and don't. I will find that one pager and put it in the chat because it's just a really good breakdown of kind of like how these bills differ and how they are the same.
I have 2 questions, if that's okay. I think for both of you, probably both of you for the first one. I think the second one is more related to Stephen. I read Senate Bill 377 last night, then read a lot of articles about it and like spiraled a little bit. But have you seen other states attempt to put forth any legislation where I feel like all of these topics, it's been very K-12 oriented, like across the country as I've heard it. Have other states done anything similar where they bring in the university systems or any like higher ed in their state have you seen that anywhere?
Oh, that is a great question. I'm not sure about any other state. I know that other states have passed bills very similar to these, and there's a reason behind it. It's being pushed by the Heritage Foundation in Texas, Tennessee, Florida, etc. Not to put you on the spot, Jen Lee, I know that there was something happening in Florida, but I can barely keep tabs on K-12 stuff. So I'm happy to ignore stuff that happens like the second a kid graduates high school policy-wise. So yeah, I don't know if there have been any other bills that have drawn in the higher ed systems like this.
I'm not sure specifically, but it would not surprise me. I mean, as Stephen said, there's a lot of like similar efforts around the country. So I don't know specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Thank you. And my second question, and I guess this is more to understanding like advocacy and how to approach certain conversations. Obviously, like after this event, we're kind of empowering everyone who attended to go out and do meetings or write letters and giving them the tools to do that. And as Emily said earlier, that like when we started the conversations, we were like, Stephen, and it started that I was like, I follow this guy on TikTok. My whole cohort follows this guy on TikTok who talks about ed policy. Like, I think that we should find out who he is. Let me find his name. Emily knew who you were before I really got to your TikTok. But one thing is that I feel like you're really able in a short amount of time to concisely talk about a topic in an engaging way, even if someone's not a budget analyst. And I know that's a lot. That's it. This is about to be a big ask, but are there any tips or tricks you have to kind of communicate in that way? Because, you know, these conversations we get to have, 30 minutes is like a ton of time and you rarely get the full 30 minutes. If you're writing a letter, you're not typing out an essay for someone, like how to be engaging and get the point across, present the facts, but even if it's someone who's not, an expert in this area, which a lot of our legislators aren't, to make sure that we're explaining the thing that we're talking about, I guess, in that engaging way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think one thing that's helped, at least on the communication side, is that if like at GBPI, we're all about holding receipts, right? We want to be able to show exactly how we got to this dollar amount, exactly how we can say this stands on the research. And as a little bit of an aside, it's part of the reason that we strive to be an anti-racist research and advocacy organization is because no one can look at the way that schools are funded, that students are doing, and ignore race and hold on to their academic integrity, right? And so, but as we do that, as we're showing kind of all the receipts, all the work that we've done to build up to that, that doesn't mean that also has to show up when we're having that quick conversation with a lawmaker. As in, if you have the research you need to be able to make a statement, to be able to make kind of this claim, then you don't have to spend time saying like, according to this study and according to, you know, the ASCA, like you can just say like, we don't even have enough money for blank, and that's why we need money for blank. You know what I mean? Where you can make the asks as long as you know, like kind of what I'm saying is standing on research, is standing on data, is standing on the lived experiences of the students I work with. It kind of releases you from, or, you know, coming from academia, like when I was at Georgia and like working with professors, there's that desire to just like not make a claim until you've made every claim that leads up to it, versus being able to look someone in the face and just say like, we need to make a change on this right now, and here's the reason. And so I think that kind of, that's helped show the difference between when I'm writing a research report versus when I'm sitting with a lawmaker and I'm saying like, we need more money for school counselors. And I know it sounds expensive, but you know what's expensive? Kids dropping out of high school. You know, like, let's spend $25 million here so we don't spend $100 million later on because we ignored issues upstream. And so I think that's helped in kind of some regard. And then personal stories, y'all are going to have so much more interaction with this, not being afraid to show that like, this is something I have seen. This is what this looks like in this context. That ends up being so powerful for folks to hear exactly what it looks like to address the problem that you hope a bill would address. And in the silence, I'm going to give a shout out to Jennifer Lee, because y'all cannot find someone who's more effective talking to lawmakers, I think, than Jen Lee, because she states facts. Like, it's just, this is the truth, whether or not you have an R or a D next to your name. And it's great to watch, because I can sometimes be too fair weathery. She does great.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks, Stephen.
There was a question that popped up in the chat that I want to make sure didn't get lost.
Okay.
And someone asked, are there legislative bills trying to make use of the lottery reserve money? Are there any people out there with plans on how to spend it?
There actually is, but I don't remember the number off the top of my head. Representative Stacey Evans has been working on a lottery reserves bill. It was attached to either a gambling or a sports betting bill last session. And unfortunately, the issues are quite tied because of lottery funding. But I think she's working on something that's like a standalone measure. So, if I'm remembering correctly, her language last year would basically just like have the legislature spend down some of that reserve money every year. And I can't remember honestly if it said exactly what it would be for, but currently, you know, the lottery funding money goes to Hope and to pre-K. So it would be, you know, it could be used for either of those, both of which are great. I don't think people need to be, I mean, I guess there is, you know, a static pot of money, but I'm not against pre-K by any means. I'd be happy for more money to go to pre-K. I'm going to have a preschooler here pretty soon. So, and all the research is great on early ed. So no issues with that. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. And another one just popped up. Do you think that it's more useful to like connect with lawmakers that are already plugged into K-12 higher ed initiatives? So I guess the people who sit on these committees, rather than your own specific elected official, and who tends to be more accessible or the most in the need of hearing from us?
I think depending on where the bill sits, so a lot of just getting things on the agenda means talking to folks in these committees, right? And just like saying, and y'all are experts in this area. And so I think sometimes when we tell people like, just contact your legislator, it's this, this realization that like they have a reason to talk to you because you are one of their constituency. The fact that y'all are experts in this area of school counseling, I think gives y'all that kind of broader reach to be able to like reach out to committee members. Not that I'm going to say people shouldn't reach out to lawmakers all the time. They absolutely should. But you're in this unique space where you can say, like, I know you sit on the education committee. I would love to talk to you about blank as a school counselor, as a rep from, you know what I mean? Like, I think that there is a little bit more pull there versus a bill that's, you know, gone up to full committee or to the full chamber. That's where you would just need to kind of like pick your targets across the state that you think has pull in, like the Republican caucus, Democratic caucus, in town, rural, like kind of looking for those angles, who has more pull to bring a lot of votes with them. But as far as just getting stuff on the agenda and getting hearings in the individual meetings, absolutely reach out to committee members and chairpersons and asking for that amount of time to make your pitch, I think is completely appropriate. Would you say that's true, Jen?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's definitely a both and. I mean, obviously the chair and the people in the committee are going to have a little bit more direct contact maybe with legislation, but there are certainly champions of issues that do not sit on committees. And, you know, obviously your representative senator is going to be more interested in what you have to say as a constituent as well. I mean, I'm just thinking about a few years ago when the dual enrollment bill came up. Everyone heard about dual enrollment, everybody. And it was, I mean, it perhaps didn't go the way everyone wanted it to, but it was, from an advocacy perspective, very effective, and I think affecting the shape of that legislation and the process and education of members and sort of, you know, them knowing and understanding how important that program was to a lot of people. And I think people were, frankly, really surprised at like how much they heard about dual enrollment. You know, and that was just because it was coming from everywhere. Like everyone was hearing about it, you know. So I think
not being afraid. When you if there's a lawmaker that you have a good relationship with, or that your organization, or you know, maybe your principal knows it, like, it's also, don't be afraid to say, who should I talk to about this bill? Just like asking them, because you might find that there are lawmakers who haven't shown up anywhere in the space before, but would love to author a piece of legislation on this, or like that you could just have someone's ear. We hear it all the time, where they just say like, yeah, I had a parent come up and ask me about blank. I thought this would be a good bill. And so I got some folks together. Like that stuff happens regularly from corners. You wouldn't necessarily like from actors that aren't always necessarily carrying the bills that you're following. And so just asking the folks in the legislature, who's got capacity for this? Who do you think would be a good messenger? Or who should I just talk to next? Because, you know, they work for us. And a lot of times the folks that I end up talking to, they want to do right by their constituents. It's just the biggest constraint we usually run into is capacity and time.
That's a good suggestion, because yeah, just asking who, they'll know. And again, it's not necessarily tied to a committee or anything. Like, for example, Representative Evans, who I mentioned before, she's never served on higher ed as far as I know. But hope is her thing. And like Robert Dickey, oh, well, I guess he is on, I mean, he obviously does ed stuff, but like Georgia Reach is his thing. Like he will, like the Reach program, he could get money into that budget for Reach during a year, and during a year when everything else gets cut, and that's just his thing. And lawmakers will just latch on to certain issues or programs for often personal reasons or family reasons or whatever it is. And then, that type of commitment is not something that's easily replicable, honestly, if you just have someone who has like an emotional attachment to something. So So yeah, ask around and people will know like, oh, this person is just like really into this topic or issue.
And pushing through the, you know, the Southern desire to not be pushy. not afraid to say like, yeah, can you introduce me via email? Like they it is a very easy step for them to just like, yeah, I'll copy you on an email. And then that email is so much more likely to get answered because like Senator Orrock is the one that caused the introduction versus like you just kind of cold emailing because you were told to.
Yeah. Representative Carpenter is like the DACA guy, like from Jalna. He just like, you know, they're just going to be, well, I guess he's now on the committee. He didn't used to be. But yeah.
Well, I think that might be it. I don't know if anyone else has any last minute questions or if y'all want to share any last minute words of advice, but I do want to make sure we thank you so much for being here. This was really, really amazing to hear directly from you guys. And I know that the work you do is really important to all of us. I spent a lot of time on your website reading things that don't quite make sense when they're on a spreadsheet with a lot of numbers. So I really appreciate you guys coming and deep diving with us, how we can be better advocates. And yeah, I think I'm going to turn it over to Miss Erin Layton.
Hi, everyone. It is my honor to introduce our next two presenters. Ashley Young is a college counselor here in Georgia and a SACAC board member who, like many of us, has attended many a legislative day. Ashley was moved to take her advocacy work to the next level beyond the scope of the annual Legislative Day program. So she's here to speak on behalf of Coalition of Educators that she galvanized to advocate for need-based financial aid for all students. Ashley will provide us a roadmap for how to find an issue that burns your biscuits and mobilize to create legislative change. Ashley initially came from Maysville, North Carolina, and is now a college counselor at Charles R. Drew Charter School. She is currently pursuing a doctorate in educational policy studies at Georgia State University. She has 14 years of experience in college access and the field of college admissions, combined with a particular interest in supporting under-resourced and first-generation college students. Ashley is joined by fellow coalition member Christina Lester. Christina is originally from Gurnee, Illinois, and after working in the Atlanta area for 6 years, she recently moved back to Chicago to be close to her family and is a current college counselor at Mount Carmel High School in Chicago, Illinois. Before entering the field of higher education, Christina worked on local and national political campaigns. She has 10 years, more than 10 years of experience in college counseling and college admissions. This experience is combined with a passion for serving first generation, low income, and students of color. Christina's goal as a professional is to work to create systemic change in higher education to ensure that all students have equal access to resources to achieve their goals. So welcome, Christina and Ashley. Thank you both for being here.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am Ashley Young, and I am so excited to be with you all today. I am also joined with Christina.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having a little Wi-Fi issues, but I am so excited to be here today. So if I come in and out, I apologize.
Excellent. So Christina and I are so happy to be here. I want to first also recognize our other team members who are so gracious and have sacrificed so much time. Jesse Boeing, Anna Peel, Jade Domain, Alex Thaxton, Sam Alenikoff. You all are amazing, and thank you so much each day for the work that you put forward. I also want to shout out Jennifer Lee, as you all just had a great presentation with her. She's our mentor, and I don't think she's aware of that just yet, but we love her. We love the work that they are able to produce for us at Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. So thank you all so much. Just to give you a quick overview of the senators that we're working with for need-based aid, and then we'll get started. We are working with Senator Nan Orrock. She was referenced just a few moments ago. In addition to Senator Sally Harrell, Representative Becky Evans, and Representative Stacey Evans. Okay. So we are going to get started. I am actually going to share my screen here, and Ms. Cusick, I am good to go. Thank you so much for your help behind the scenes. So I'm going to share my screen. If you give me just one moment here. I think there's a meme that says when folks go to share their screen, they say, now I'm gonna share my screen here. They kind of start speaking in that kind of tone. So that's kind of what I'm doing. Here we go. Excellent. So can you see my screen okay? Okay, excellent. And I'm actually not trying to share it with you all. I'm actually just wanting to get started. Awesome. All right, let's go to the very beginning here. So let's start with reflection time. I would like for everyone to close your eyes, if you can, please. Just close your eyes. We're gonna do something a little bit different to kind of get you in this space. Just indulge me for a bit. Imagine that you are a fish, but not just any fish. The type of fish that is courageous, the type of fish that does not shy away from obstacles. In fact, you're the kind of fish that is most famously known for swimming upstream, while other fish instinctively swim downstream to preserve their energy in hopes of having a longer lifespan. Imagine that you are a salmon. You swim upstream for the survival of your young. As a matter of fact, you are designed to have high-speed swimming. But there are also drawbacks, of course. You face obstacles, such as hawks, humans, and other fish. And unfortunately, sometimes salmon may not live as long as other fish because of the long starvation and the strenuous travel. So what does it look like in a world where educators, leaders, and trailblazers answer the call to transform by swimming upstream? How can one move from navigating downstream? And if you are a visionary for the young, you have purposely chosen to take on the burden to spawn and swim upstream to protect them. So as you continue to close your eyes for just a few more moments, I want you to reflect. What is your burden to spawn? Or as some of you all affectionately hear me say, what burns your biscuits? What happens when the lineage is extinct? And last thought, someone will have to be upstream. Will you answer that call? Lastly, Dr. Bettina Love reminds us that abolitionist educators fight for children they will never meet or see because they are visionaries. You can open up your eyes. We're going to continue on from reflection time, but I wanted to really take a moment to help contextualize your mental sort of space and capacity as we talk about this very necessary work that we are doing here in Georgia. And think about how you are not just navigating the downstream, but how if you feel the call to transform and do the work to swim upstream, how can you see yourself, whether it's this issue or any other issue, making change and being a transformative leader, all right? So I just want to make it clear, today has been an amazing program. We've heard about many different issues. We've heard from NACAC, we've heard of arguably the best think tank here in Georgia. And now we are going to help you all connect the dots with a very tangible way that educators just like yourselves have taken the initiative to make change, to turn passion into action. So keep in mind, what is the issue that you are going to decide today? Now, this is just the beginning, right? Having the conversations with the legislators, but what is going to be said today that is going to spark you to swim upstream and to take that call so that you can be as strong and as just courageous as the salmon that chooses to swim upstream, okay? So we're going to start with a quick policy landscape of financial aid in Georgia, just so you can situate the context and understand why it is so important that we do the work that we do. I will kick us off, and then I will turn it over to the amazing Christina Lester, who actually served last year on the Georgia Legislative Day Committee. But I won't take her shine. She'll tell you more about that. So let me just give you a quick overview of HOPE. This was established under Governor Zell Miller, hence the Zell Miller Scholarship, which is a part of the HOPE program. But in 1992, Georgians voted to allow the creation of the lottery, which of course in the South was a huge deal. One of the ways as we've done our research is that connecting the lottery to education was a great way that people were able to digest the idea of having a lottery here in Georgia. In 1993, the first lottery-funded HOPE Scholarship was awarded. At that time, it was full tuition. As we just learned, we're getting closer to that point, but not there. We see revisions along the way. And in 1995, so very shortly after, the $100,000 income eligibility cap was eliminated and added awards for mandatory fees and books. So just to be clear, HOPE Scholarships started off as a form of merit and need-based scholarship, right? And by 1995, it was an exclusive merit-based scholarship. As a matter of fact, Georgia is actually #1 for money per capita as they spend on merit-based scholarships. But as we know, we are tied for last for need-based, okay? And then in 2011, the Fee and Book Award is eliminated and Zell Miller is created. From what I understand, that was a way in which HOPE was actually kept alive, but there were a lot of changes that made, one of which was the test score that was added requirement for the Zell Miller Scholarship. Now, for the nitty gritty, Georgia is ranked, as I mentioned, /tied for 50th in the US for need-based scholarship. One way of saying it is we are one of 2 states. But what I love to say is that we are last. We are ranked last in the US for states that offer need-basst aid. This is a huge issue, folks. And this next slide is going to really drive this home. By the way, all of this information, I didn't even bother putting the reference in here. There are some references, excuse me, of course, to give people credit for their work, but I'm just going to tell you, this is Jennifer Lee's information. She's an amazing policy analyst. All of this research is, because Jennifer is amazing and puts that information out there for us to access. So what is the big difference, right? So when I first heard that Georgia was the only state, or excuse me, one of 2 states that did not offer need-based aid, I still had to wrap my mind around what that really meant. So when the rubber meets the road, what does that actually mean? There are 2 different goals of need-based and merit-based aid, right? So need-based aid, the goal is to actually create access and increase educational attainment. Versus merit-based aid, the goal is simply to retain students in state and to also help boost the college choices for students who arguably were already going to college, and in a lot of cases already have the money to pay for college. Just the side note fact that I love to tell folks when I'm talking about this issue in Georgia is that when the income cap came off in 1995, shortly thereafter in a lot of suburban places right outside of Atlanta, we saw car sales boom. What's the relation to car sales and financial aid? The fact is the parents and the families who were saving up for their students to go to college actually took that money, instead of sending it to the college that they were hoping to send their child to, they were covered by the HOPE and Zell Miller Scholarship. They actually took that money and just bought themselves a car, right? So think about some of the students that you work with, and that not only is paying for college not an option, not even getting a car is an option. And so HOPE Scholarship has really created huge disparities from our students that are under-resourced. So again, need-based creates access, increases educational attainment. Merit-based simply only helps boost your college choices for in-state. Who receives HOPE? And so let me just say here, I'm a pretty passionate person. I hope you're feeling the passion. I hope your biscuits are burning as we say these things, because these are not facts, I think, as an educator, that you can actually speak about and just be okay with. I hope that you are getting angry. I hope that you are getting that righteous anger to turn that passion into action, because these are some heavy hitting stats. Let's look at this. The Zell-Miller Scholarship, which is our most selective merit-based scholarship in Georgia, only 6% of Hispanic students, 6% of Black students, 12% of Asian students, and 4% of 2 or more races receive the Zell-Miller, as opposed to 70% of white students. That is a huge disparity, folks. Hope is slightly better, but for only 6% of Hispanic and Black students, that is a huge issue. Just to give you a little bit more context, almost a third of the students in the University System of Georgia are Black, and only 6% of them are receiving the Zell-Miller Scholarship. That should have the biscuit sizzling by now. Full tuition scholarship, most likely for higher income. So let's talk about class. As you can see here, for students, for parents that make over $120,000, excuse me, let me move my bar here so I can look at this, right? 62% of them are receiving HOPE, and 31% of them are receiving Zell, okay? So this is for students with at least one, with the scholarship for at least one semester. This information started around 13-14 up until the 18-19 school year. But as you can see, students who have a high sort of parents' income are receiving the Zell-Miller and the HOPE Scholarship. Let's also look at the institutions that are receiving, okay? And let me make it very clear. I know folks on this call may be from these institutions, so we are not, this is not personal. This is a system issue which we all need to be advocating for, okay? So flagship universities have the highest share of HOPE recipients. Look at Tech, look at Georgia College and State University and the University of Georgia. Almost all their students have HOPE. And when you look at all other university system schools of Georgia, it's 45% or less. So most of the students who are actually getting HOPE, again, we see another disparity with our most highly selective public institutions in Georgia. All right, so I am going to stop for a moment, and I'm going to turn it over to Christina Luster, and she's actually going to help you understand how we are turning our passion into action, and hope that you are being inspired from the information that you are hearing today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Ashley. Again, my name is Christina Luster, and I am currently serving as a college counselor at Mount Carmel High School. But this time last year, I was sitting in a very similar session, and I listened in on Ashley's presentation, What Burns Your Biscuits, and I was like, I could feel the red going up my neck. I just could not believe that there was such inequity in how HOPE was benefiting students in Georgia, and how it was really hurting students of color, low income, first generation students. And from that moment on, I have been working with Ashley and the other members of our coalition to really address these issues. And the issues all begin with, why does Georgia need need-based financial aid? And through many conversations, we have come up with these 3 components, the first being equity. And that is the issue that most of us are the most passionate about. So when we see the students that we serve, we're seeing an inequity issue that is not only impacting these students, but it's impacting from the moment that they step into our offices, the classrooms, and it's impacting their future. So what they will be and what resources they will have in their future and for their families. It's also important when it comes to economics, right? We hear a lot in the political sphere of, well, what will this do for the economy? And not allowing Georgians to attend institutions of higher education because of a lack of funding negatively impacts our economy. And then lastly, and Ashley spoke to this, but when we think of Georgia, we want to be the best at everything that we do, right? We want Georgians to have the best opportunity. And by not having need-based financial aid, we are not providing that to our citizens. Go ahead, Ashley, if you can click to the next slide. Okay, so equity. When it just comes to the percentage, 93% of students with families earning $120,000 or more earn that Hope or Zell Miller scholarship. And when you're comparing that to just 61% of families making under $15,000, that is an equity issue. So the wealthiest families in Georgia are benefiting the most from Hope and Zell Miller. That's a great benefit, right? Those families, their kids, they're able to get that 3.0 or above, or that 3.7, and that is helping those families financially. But a lot of those families have the income to pay for their kids' education. So that is a benefit that is not a need. Then when it comes to post-secondary completion rates, almost a little under 17% of students in rural Georgia are having that completion rate, compared to a little over 34% in urban areas. So that's a big difference between rural student populations and urban student populations. And then lastly, Black and Native American students are the least likely to receive this merit scholarship, right? When that is, out of these bullet points, that is really what burns my biscuits. So we have, and Ashley said, a third of the students attending college are African-American Black students, right? And they are the least likely to receive that funding. And oftentimes they are the most in need of need-based financial aid, right? So you see that economic inequity is also pulling down that educational attainment rate. When it comes to economics, this first bullet point is something that our state representatives and politicians as a whole are really blown away by, right? So Georgia's post-secondary attainment rate is only at 52.8% right now, but it needs to be at least at 60% by 2025 to satisfy labor market demands. So that means that if we do not increase that rate of post-secondary attainment, we will not be able to build our economy in the way that we need to be successful as a state. Each college graduates in Georgia add roughly $2 million to the state's GDP. So by adding more highly educated citizens to our state, we are able to generate more tax revenue, and overall, you're going to have a better economy. Highly selective institutions received, I mean, this amount of money is insane, right? Like, you see the numbers here. They're receiving these HOPE funds, and they're receiving more than 24 colleges combined, and 3 times more than the technical colleges. These are also the institutions that happen to be serving families that are making over that $120,000 a year. So what are we doing to bring need-based financial aid to Georgia? So this is really where I want to encourage all of you to get out there and use your voice. So this is something that our group, our coalition said, we can't sit by and let this continue. We need to bring this information to the people that represent us, that we elect to serve us, right? And I think that that is a critical component to what we're doing. A lot of times you will feel that government and the people that are representing us is so big and not manageable, but at the heart of it, we are the ones that put them in the position to help best serve us in our communities. So what we have already done, so with that, our group came together and we said, here's the problem. So Ashley just laid out that problem. But then we said, okay, let's do some research. Let's figure out how the legislative process works so that we know how to navigate this process in order to get this problem addressed, for our representatives to know this is an issue, we're the experts in this field, and now we want to know how to use the process to get what we need. Our next step was to build a team of key players. So from professionals in the field, college counselors working with students every day and helping them navigate, college admission, as well as the financial aid process and seeing those gaps. Policy experts such as Jennifer Lee that has been able to provide the numbers for us. So a lot of these numbers that you all have heard about, the numbers don't lie. This is an inequity issue. This is an economic issue. This is an issue that is holding back Georgia. So putting together that list of key players and also reaching out to others outside of the legislative process. So I have reached out to the governor's office. I have reached out to candidates running for governor. I've reached out to every policy aide you can possibly find to say, hey, this is an issue affecting Georgia students, and we need your help and support to make sure that these students have every opportunity to reach their goals. We've created documents. So it's funny when you're meeting with these legislators and representatives, we truly have found that we are the experts. So they need our help creating documents that lay out what the current situation is, what the need is, and how we can go about creating policy that will address this need. With that said, we've also found that stories, both from professionals and students, have really helped politicians as well as government officials realize, hey, this is affecting real people. This is affecting people that are voting for you. This student isn't able to go to college because they had a 2.9 GPA and now they don't have the funding. So they're going to go straight into the workforce because they can't go to that school. And then lastly, we have really hit the ground running when it comes to speaking to these members of, the local House and Senate, speaking to people at the governor's office, speaking with lobbyists that know how to navigate this political sphere in ways that we might not understand in our capacity, and overall just making sure that people are aware of what is going on and what the need is. So Ashley has said many times we're doing it scared, right? So we had no idea what state legislators were going to need, and we were just kind of hitting the ground running and providing them information as we go. So again, we have done all of this in the past, and we are continuing to do this right now. So weekly right now, our coalition is meeting with state legislators that have really become advocates for this cause. And they're using our knowledge to work through the political process. Also, policy analysts, helping us to understand the bigger picture and how we can use the narratives and the student stories and then plug that into the numbers, right? So politicians love to hear, how is this going to help Georgia? How is this going to help an individual student? And then putting that all together and making those relationships. In our last meeting with various state legislators, we came back to a bill that was actually passed, HB 787 in 2018. And this basically laid the groundwork. We have a bill that says we need need-based financial aid, but there was never money put behind this. And it didn't have the detail in the bill or the support, which is most important, from the executive branch as well as the higher ed committee to get it off the ground. So that was something that a few of our state legislators said, hey, you know what, we have this, and it might be easier to take this and the documents that your coalition has created that lay out how this will best serve students and how we need this bill to function in order to make amendments to this bill that has already gone through and just needs to be implemented and funded. So that is where we are currently. We're saying, okay, this bill, nothing happened with this bill. It was passed, but it has the bare bones framework of what we need to create a need-based financial aid program in Georgia. Let's make those changes and let's get the support of both a legislative and executive branch to move this forward. We need the funding to actually make this a real thing. So it's kind of that moment, put your money where your mouth is. So obviously in 2018, you thought that we needed a need-based financial aid program, but it's just been sitting there doing nothing, even though it is, it's there, it's just not working. And then right now we're in the process of waiting to hear back from Legislative Council with either a new bill number or amendments to that current bill. So we are really in a really exciting time in our coalition because we've done the hard work, which is putting together all this information. We know our facts. We know that this is needed. We know that there is an equity issue, an economic issue, and an issue when it comes to really promoting the state of Georgia and how it best serves its citizens. So we're at a point where we have presented all of this information with all of our partners. And we are now pushing our elected representatives to make this a reality. And whether that is through this former bill that was passed or creating a new bill, we are pushing very hard for both branches of government in Georgia to take this to the next level.
Wow, the broiler is on. Great job, Christina. Great job. I just want to leave you all with a few things, and we will leave at least 10 minutes or so for questions, because this is the time, you know, when David Hawkins came in from NACAC, like he's been doing this for 30 years, and Jennifer and Stephen are over at a think tank. But let's just be very, very clear, folks, before I even get into how you can help, that we are the same, right? We provide direct service. We are counselors, we are practitioners, we are higher education advocates on the ground with the students. So I remember my very first legislative day, it was only 7 years ago. I was working at Georgia State and I was like, oh, it's right downstairs. Great, I'll just, you know, join in. Next thing I know, the following year, I am a part of the committee. I serve as co-chair for Legislative Day. And I had an opportunity to go to NACAC Day on the Hill, which David Hawkins referenced, and obviously hoping to get back in person with that. So because of my experience, because of just my willingness to put myself out there, which a lot of our committee members have, I see you all doing it, the committee today, like this is all a part of the process. We are planting seeds each year. And we want to make sure that people just like you see yourselves and feel empowered to turn passion into action. As my forever president says, former President Barack Obama, we are the people we have been waiting for, okay? If you are waiting on your lawmaker, it may take some time, or it may actually never happen. It just so happens that the folks that I'm working with are technically my state legislators. And again, these conversations literally came from Legislative Day, right? I was planting seeds then when the vision came to me, and the, you know, as we built the key players. But it came to me as I was talking to my legislators as it was initiated at Legislative Day. So there's nothing we've done so unique or so fascinating, but again, turn passion into action. Last thing, if you don't know me, I am a small town girl from Maysville, North Carolina. Don't let the pursuit of the PhD fool you. I am learning as I go. I cannot stress that enough. I am learning as I go, okay? So I really beg you all to find what it is that you have to swim upstream for, right? In that reflection, I said that one of the big reasons that salmon swim upstream is so that they can lay their eggs upstream. They are getting ready for a new generation. How are we preparing for the new generation with the work that we are doing now? Okay. So the last couple things I want to share with you all, and Jade really touched on this, and so we are just hammering this home time and time again. And if you are a member of SACAC, then you have seen the emails come out. So please don't ignore our emails. We need you to share your stories. We literally cannot do this work without it. Even on our to-do list, as we met with the legislators last Friday, everybody sort of had their to-do list, our partners, our policy analysts, our legislators, and on our to-do list, I said that we are continuing to collect student stories. So please make an honest woman out of me, okay? And send in your student stories. Like, you are the folks that we need them for. And a good point that Jade mentioned, even if they aren't your students, because let's say, for instance, the student population that you work with, this is not necessarily a plight of theirs. It may be something different. You can use the student stories that we can send out anonymously and have real information about students right here in Georgia. So we have a link there, and we can certainly, of course, share that with the committee to send that out in a follow-up email after we are done here today. And then complete the action alert. This is something we've been sharing for a year or so. And I'll be honest, we're still trying to figure out, as we go, what exactly we're going to do with all this information. But to have it ready and prepared, you all can help in that way. And then the very last thing, if you do nothing else, again, reflect on being that fish that again swims upstream. And I know you all may be tired of hearing me say this, or maybe I'm just obsessed with biscuits. Either way, I just want to see us all take on our burden. Imagine if everyone on this call reflected on what it is that burnt their biscuits. Now, again, there are many, many issues. Like, I struggle with standardized testing. I struggle with the rising college costs, right? Struggle with a lot of issues, but the issue that gets my feet on the floor every day, that commands me to sacrifice time to go beyond anything that anyone has ever asked me to do, again, is need base aid in Georgia. I found that, our team has found that. What is going to be the issue that burns your biscuits? And I will end with this. Dr. Bettina Love, again, I've quoted her several times. She's amazing. And let me just say this, I really want to see someone else here. I want to see another group of folks, another passion into action group of educators here next year. We are happy to take a break and continue the conversation and continue the good work, but we would love for someone on this call to be chatting about how they have taken the information and turned that passion into action. So the last quote I'm going to leave here, abolitionist educators fight for children they will never meet or see because they are visionaries. I may have already mentioned that quote, but I just want to end on that. Again, we are fighting for students that you will never see from rural Georgia, okay? Because I love Atlanta, I sometimes feel like I live in the city of Atlanta. The state of Atlanta. I don't get out too much. But I'm advocating for the kids down in Valdosta in North Georgia. We all are. So again, your student stories, complete the action alert. And I want to see you all here next year, okay? Thank you very much. That is it for us. And I think we have a few minutes to take some questions.
Thank you, Ashley and Christina, for that incredible presentation. We are so just grateful and impressed from the work that you're doing, and grateful on behalf of all students in Georgia that you're working so hard to advocate for access and for need-based aid. At this time, any questions for either of our presenters or for the rest of the coalition? Feel free to put questions in the chat. I'd be happy to read them aloud.
If we want to get involved and help, if this is something that has sparked interest in us, how would we how would we do that? Who would we get in touch with? How would we join the coalition, I guess?
Each day we're getting more and more official. Jade, would you mind sharing with the group our new email address? It is no longer my Gmail. She's going to put that in the chat. Just reach out to us. We are happy. Again, we are all very self-directed. This has never been a case where we've asked any of the folks to join us. It's just been professionals who have said, I'm ready to answer the call. So GA Coalition of Educators at Gmail is our email address. And so we ask that you email us there and we'll get you connected. That's a good question, Daniel. So specifically for the Native American community, I'll be honest, and Christina, you might know, but I cannot answer that question specifically. Obviously, as a marginalized group in Georgia, they would benefit greatly from having need-based aid scholarships. I can look back at the stat to see how many students that are Native American, and I'm not even sure they were maybe even included, which is very, very disheartening for many different reasons, right? And the percentage of how many students receive Zell and Hope. But clearly, many students, many groups that are on the margins would be centered through the need-based aid policy. So I can start there. Anything more specific than that, I don't have the information. I'll be very honest. We can work on getting some of that. Christina, do you have anything to add there?
I would just say, as a whole, Native American students suffer from some of the highest poverty rates in the United States. So when you just look at that fact alone, and parent educational attainment, it is definitely an issue that greatly affects that population.
This is a great question, Ms. Denard. Thank you so much for asking. So Miriam asked, what are the most common responses outside of lack of funding, which the lie detector determined that was a lie. That is not the case in Georgia, okay? From legislators who are not in favor of reforming need-based aid or pushing forward legislation. Christina, you want to get started? And I'm happy to tag team on this very important question.
Yes. So you'll hear oftentimes that, well, it's this idea of why do they deserve it? So if students aren't getting a 3.0, why, just work harder and you'll be able to get Hope or Zell Miller. And our coalition has done a really great job of speaking to the inequity that exists in education K through 12. In how education is funded, the impacts that has on a high school GPA, or where students are going to high school, or the resources that those students have. So we have a lot of pushback on that. The money is there, as Ashley said. There is the money. We just have to get our elected officials to be willing to say this is an issue that warrants that funding. Well, we also hear a lot of pushback about not having, and Ashley, you might know the term for this better, but the idea of, oh, let's have kids work for it. Like if you want need-based financial aid, let's throw in a work component or like a moral, I think that we've had state legislators say a moral component. And to be honest, there isn't a good reason not to fund this program overall. So the money is there and we are pushing to use that money. And I think our coalition as a whole, this isn't something that isn't needed. This is an actual right that students have to receive the education that will allow them to progress and have the same opportunity as people that have the financial backing.
Also add something that we have got to continue. I think maybe a year or so ago, I decided to be very direct about the issues that we are dealing with, because it's going to take some radical change and radical ideologies and ways in which we approach these issues, because they are so insidious and so devastating. To answer the question, and Christina, you hit the nail on the head, the undergirding force is white supremacy. The undergirding force of why Georgia cannot have need-based aid is so that the white community, white populations in Georgia can maintain supremacy. What does that mean? How do we even connect that? If we think about it, even when you look at the stat with the 70% of students who receive Zell Miller scholarship, right? If we took away that test component of the 26 and the 1200, how many more students of color would actually qualify? That's what I mean when I say we have to dismantle white supremacy, and the way that we can do that through educational policy is by adding need-based aid and being more equitable and doing equity audits of the work that we do. Think about it this way. We unfortunately don't learn this in our history books, but perhaps somewhere along the line, especially if you've seen the movie Selma, directed by Ava DuVernay, you saw that at the very beginning of the movie, Oprah Winfrey had to complete a literacy test to vote. Okay. One of the other barriers to vote for many people were poll taxes. If you had outstanding tax bills, you could not vote. None of these things should impact your ability or your right, rather, to vote. So how does that relate to educational need-based aid policy? Putting in a work-based component is a modern day poll tax, is a modern day literacy test. So when we connect the dots on the what I may call the trickery of white supremacy, they are not fooling us any longer, right? We're having these liberating conversations that help us understand what's actually going on. So the status quo, again, is white supremacy. The status quo is 70% white students getting Zale. We have to shake that up. We have to agitate that. That is the undergirding issue. I think is the reason why we can't get the success on that. So that's me just kind of really getting to the root, but much of what Christina said, and again, white supremacy is reigning.
I was actually just reading for school the other day, and I guess it's a little bit of a piggyback, which I hate to do, but I was reading about post-integration of schools and colleges, and that the underlining thought was to embrace opportunity and not access after integration, and how that still affects us today, because nothing has changed in the way we do higher ed. And that was, integration, that was my parents' generation. That's one generation removed from me. So if you embrace opportunity, it's like, yeah, you could all come here, but we're not going to make it any more accessible for you to come here, so you don't have to. So that's why we enter, I think, in that legacy of what happened then affecting us now. And opportunity is like a thing we love to say as Americans, like equal opportunity, but that can't be the conversation anymore, because that still persists in an education system where people are disenfranchised. And I never heard it written like that, and it really hit me that I was like, oh yeah, equal opportunity. That's not, it almost feels like a bad word now to say it that way.
And David Hawkins really touched on that this morning, I think, too. And I want to make it very clear, folks, you all are my people, right? And we can have these conversations. I'm an Aries, which means I'm just passionate, right? I bring the fire signs. And when we're talking with legislators, we have to be careful. Imagine how that makes us feel when we see the students, when we have the student stories, and we are politely asked, even from the legislators on our team, to move the stat down about Black and Native American students receiving, less scholarships, right? Imagine how we feel when we can't say, no, that's not how you should approach need-based aid, asking students to work. And then Jay brought up, I remember, a very poignant point. There are not even enough jobs on campus. Have we even thought about the fact that Hope Scholarship, many students lose the Hope Scholarship after their first year? Okay, and I think Alex was referencing that, wanted to bring that to light. And no one asked. So Ms. Denard is our early college and persistence counselor. When she reconciles our records for Georgia Futures and gets our students going for that year with Hope and Zell-Miller scholarships, no one is asking what their disciplinary record was. Good moral character. So, all of that to say, we have to be able to manage that passion, because you don't want to lose your audience, you don't want to lose your legislators, but you want to be true to who you are. And our group is committed to making sure that this is equitable policy, or we will be so far from this policy, because again, we are the people we've been waiting for, and it would make no sense for us to do all of this work and for it to exclude the very children that we are trying to help.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing and for the great questions. I know that I'm excited knowing that when I go into my conversations that there's been a lot of foundational work done from your group, and that we can continue to see that and cheer you on and support you throughout the next steps that you're going to be taking on. So thank you. As we're closing the day, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came today. I know people had to come in and out and it was a long day to be on Zoom, but we really appreciate it. And again, we're super excited at the prospect of a version of this event next year in person again. I think it's just a really amazing opportunity. Want to remind you that after this event, you're going to get a post-event survey. You're also, if you were requesting a meeting with the legislator, you're going to also receive information on how to pursue that, along with information of who might also be in the same district as you and would have the same legislator, so you can pursue group meetings. Someone brought it to my attention that that would be great information also to have for letter writing. So those of you, well, everyone here today, when you receive that packet in the mail, I'm also going to be sure to include who might also be writing a letter to the same person as you. Which hopefully that helps the conversations. If you need to update your address again, or maybe you're like, I wasn't wanting to meet with anyone, but now I feel really empowered to have some of these conversations, please just shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat just so I can update that and make sure you get all the information that you deserve. If you are going to do a virtual meeting and pursue a Zoom or Teams meeting with the legislator, please be sure to use these virtual backgrounds. They were in the initial email from Diana. I can always send them out to you again. But one thing is that you're going to those meetings representing SACAC, not so much your specific institution or school. And I know public schools have rules about that. So you want to use these SACAC backgrounds. You want to make sure that your school name isn't in your title or your name on Zoom or whatever is presenting forward. That way you can have those meetings without having to carry, I guess, the burden of representing your entire institution, which is not your job. So you're representing yourself and SACAC. That brings us to the end of the formal program. I think that Emily Cusick and I can also hang out for a moment as the program ends if there's any last minute questions about administrative stuff. I did want to leave you guys with a quote since I feel like Ashley now has empowered me to at least, I didn't want to say my quote at first. I thought it would be cheesy, but now I feel empowered to say my quote. And it's from Samantha Power, who is the former US ambassador to the UN. And she said that all advocacy is at its core an exercise in empathy. And I think sometimes it's easy to get bogged down with all the things you might have just learned about for the first time, or even things you might have heard a couple times, but it's still a little overwhelming. But as long as you're going to, I think, your representatives with an empathetic heart, which I think we all have, that's why we're here today, you're going to be able to express that and hopefully pass that along to them, that maybe even if something's happening not today or this session, that they're going to keep that story and keep what you told them and carry it into their future and the future work they might do. So I have full faith that we're able to do that and we're able to do it well. And I just want to thank you guys for being here today, sharing your time with us. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the future at Legislative Day or at a college fair or somewhere. I feel like we cross each other's paths, maybe at SACAC next month, in 2 months. I guess it's February. It's SACAC in 2 months. So thank you so much. And like I said, we'll hang out here for a little bit in case there are any questions about administrative stuff. But I hope you guys have a great week and a great almost weekend.
Hey folks, I'm about to hop off. I just want to say job well done. I mean, this is the second virtual pandemic, legislative day. As a former coacher, I'm just feeling the good vibes and the love. You all have done an excellent job. Excellent job. So thank you all so much for keeping this going. And I just want to, tell you and affirm you all on today's work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.